All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's Sunday night. Usually we don't have a class now, but on Thursday night last week, I kind of fizzled out far earlier than I usually do. So I want to at least continue and get further in this discourse, this amazing discourse. It got very intense and very complicated, and I wasn't prepared. I'm not going to say I'm prepared now, but at least a little clearer. Let's see where we can go over here. We were learning about the birth of Moshe and the introduction regarding the birth of Moshe, which it says, which is last week's Torah portion, and what it takes to bring Moshe's neshama into this world. That's awesome. We need Moshe. We need Moshe's light and Moshe's presence in this world. Maybe if we can behave a little bit in the manner that he discusses over here, we can channel Moshe's neshama into the world, and which Moshe and Mashiach are really one. Moshe is the opener, the one who opens up the entire messianic um, journey, because from the giving of the Torah, from the going out of Egypt until the coming of Mashiach is one long journey. And Moshe is the trailblazer. He breaks open and he introduces Torah, which once we download the Torah completely into the world, we have Mashiach. And what does that really mean? It means that through the via the Torah download and its complete assimilation into the creation, to allow the Torah to completely remake the creation, or rather uncover the deeper truths about the creation in a way that it's a total makeover. And what we get as a result of that is we get Mashiach's world. And what's Mashiach's world? A world that is completely assimilated and unified with God. Unified with Hashem. That's the perfect world of Mashiach. So since Moshe really acts as the matchmaker. He's the one who channels and joins and brings about the marriage between God and the world. So in order to bring his soul into the world, obviously we understand it had to be a very unique marriage of two very, very powerful people. And the verse describes it as a man from the house of Levi. Doesn't even say who his name is. And he married the daughter of Levi. Not much to know about them, just right. So we know he was Amram and she was Yocheved, but the Torah doesn't say anything about it other than she's the daughter of Levi and he's the man from the house of Levi. So we said, and obviously in those words, it captures the essence of what this is all about. Now, as you know, in Chassidus Chabad, there's no, quick, I'll tell you a short vert, I'll give you a short answer. It's a deep, very deep understanding of how the Torah transforms and changes the dynamics, fundamentally rewires all of creation, all of existence. And obviously we have to get into a very, very deep understanding of the source of our current reality and what is lacking in it and what is then changed as a result of the Torah. And then we understand what does it take to bring the man who is going to make it happen into the world. And we're going to see that the ingredient is exactly that, a man from the house of Levi who marries the daughter of Levi. So to understand this, he brought a verse that we heard last week, in which he mentions a pasuk in Tehillim from chapter 104 in Psalms. And where King David HaMelech says, "Leviyasan zeh yitzarta l'sachik boi," that God created the Leviyasan fish, which is this huge, ginormous fish, to be entertained by it. And we even brought what the Gemara says, that there's a certain time of the day, which sounds like the weirdest thing, that God plays with the Leviyasan. So we don't have to ask any questions on that. That is self understood that it doesn't make any sense at all. What we're going to see is that that's the entire entertainment of creation, and that's the whole purpose of all of creation, is the entertainment of the Leviyasan. Now, the Leviyasan is a cousin to Levi, because they have the same wording. Levi and Leviyasan is the same idea. So Levi is the one who brings about the Leviyasan. Now, it doesn't seem to make any sense, but let's understand something like this. Leviyasan is the prize. After Mashiach comes, we are going to be at a big, big feast, and we're going to eat the Leviyasan fish. And as I discussed last week, it can't mean that we're just going to have a lot of good fish, because that would not have justified in any way all the pain and suffering that we've been through. So the prize is not worth it. No matter how good this fish is, I don't care if you get the best Japanese sushi chef. It was like crazy. It just will not justify what we've been through for the fish. So we understand that the idea of the Leviathan is something much deeper, notwithstanding the idea that it's also fish, but it's the physical fish that represents the spiritual fish. The idea of Leviathan means attachment. When Mashiach comes, we will experience the highest level of attachment to God, and that's the Leviathan. That's the prize. The prize is the fruit of all of our labors, in which we labored to unify heaven and earth. And then we will eat that, which means we will comprehend it, we will understand it, we will experience it, we will digest that unity between Hashem and the world that was created through all of our labor. Now, since the Leviathan is the final goal, which means the ultimate attachment, so the one who initiates that is the power of the Leviathan, the power to make that attachment. And that's the secret of the tribe of Levi. Levi is the tribe that has the unique ability, has that unique power to bring about this state of attachment. And therefore, the forebearer of the man who's most responsible for this state of attachment was Moses, the forebearer of him. His parents are going to highlight within themselves the Levite qualities. And what's the Levite quality? Is attachment. Where do we find that? When before Levi was born, his mother said, "Hapam yelava ishi elai." Now my husband will be attached to me. So, in addition to this meaning that Leah, the one of the wives of Yaakov, is going to feel more loved and cherished by her husband because she brought him 3 children, it also means, in the greater sense, Leah, as we're going to see later in the discourse, represents the entire divine energy that is invested and is the source of creation. It's the feminine energy of God on the level of Shekhinah, or in our case, actually super Shekhinah, which means not just Shekhinah, but the Shekhinah in its very, very beginning source. But that's the investment that God made when he created the world, the divinity that becomes part of the creation. And that divinity that is part of the creation, as we are going to see in this amazing discourse, by the mere fact that it became the source of creation, has experienced the most horrific downgrade. It has been diminished and compromised with an incredible compromise. And as a result of that, it yearns for the pre-compromised state. And it yearns for intimacy with the infinite that it has left behind when it became a source for the creation. Just like a soul, when it comes down here, yearns for godliness more than a soul in heaven. The deprived state of the soul causes the soul to have a greater yearning. It's the concept of a Baal Tshuva being higher than a tzaddik. So too, the soul of all of creation yearns for unification. And that's Leah, that's Leah. And what does she say, however, that when Levi was born, Apam Yelava Ishi Elai, now my husband, who is the masculine infinite light that is above and beyond creation, will attach himself to me. In other words, what will it take to make God come down? God in all of his entirety, God with all of his greatness, God with all of his infinity and boundlessness. What is it going to take God to become that he too should descend into the creation, not just project a projected light into the creation to be a source of creation, which that light is in a sense, to a certain degree, becomes limited and finite. But what will it take for God himself to get intimate with his creation? It takes the power of Levi. We need to engage him. And there's something, until Leah didn't have Levi, she didn't have what it takes to serve as the attraction to God to come down, to be attracted to the world. Now she's got that power. She's got somebody. And that is, obviously within Levi is Moshe. And Moshe is the one who brings the Torah to the world and makes the world attractive to God. And we're going to see what that attraction is. And then based on that, we'll understand what does it mean that on the 4th hour, when it gives you God's schedules, we spoke last week, the sages give us God's daily day schedule, so appointment book. And over there's time blocked out every day where God is busy. He's busy, he's being entertained. And it's the 4th hour of the day that, or the 4th 3 hours, I think it's the last quarter of the day, in which God is busy playing with the Leviathan fish. So we'll understand what that means, Bezrat Hashem, later in the Maimer. But it basically means God is enjoying this attached state that we are the ones, when we do the work of Levi, we attach the world to God, and that's his pleasure, and that's his delight, and that's what it means he's entertained by the Leviathan. So that's the idea of the discourse. So we're going to understand what is this unique element of Levi, and why is that so precious? And the main idea, I'm going to give you the whole discourse in a nutshell, and then later, obviously, in order to appreciate it, we have to go and delve deep. In other words, in order to really get the to really understand how wonderful, how magnificent all of this is, we first have to understand how pathetic the creation is to the infinity of God, and how lowly the world has become, and how if we don't reach the final purpose and the final goal, how how meaningless everything is, and how by us participating in the hard work, it's not easy work, it's daily exercises that me and you do every day to overcome basically our own egos and our own voice that's within ourselves. Not only a voice, it's ourselves that try to that wants to inflate this sense of independence and separation from God, in which we want to become independent being and do our own thing and not serve our Creator. The very struggle itself is the entertainment of God. When we rise beyond our struggle and we surrender ourselves, when we overcome our innate state of beingness and recognize that our beingness has no power at all. That means we're not responsible for our beingness. And it's only God who's beaming beingness into us every second. And as a result of his beaming of beingness into us, we are being. And therefore our beingness, our very, very existence, should be devoted every moment and every second to the fulfillment of his wishes. And when we take God seriously every moment of our life, now obviously if we're a tzaddik, we do it every moment. If we're not a tzaddik, then we keep on battling this darkness. We have a darkness in our consciousness which blocks the light, which tries to disconnect us from this cosmic truth, and it tries to suck us up in the black hole of self, and we become self-absorbed and selfish and preoccupied with our own pleasure, and that only comes from a disconnect from the reality of that God is the source of our existence. But the reason why it's entertaining to God is precisely because he knows he brought, in other words, as he's going to explain in the discourse, all the highest levels of heaven, where there is so much incredible revelation, and there's so much, the service of the divine is so intense. There is such love, there's such inspiration, there's such fire and passion, there is such energy, there's such enlightenment. Yet all of that is pathetic. It's wonderful for the creations because they don't really, but from the true perspective, it's very pathetic, because that whole thing has no purpose, no need. Because as high as they go, they're still unmeasurably lower than where they were had the energy not get locked into the state that they're in. Meaning, had they not been created and had their energy still been in their source, it would have been infinitely higher. So they might be all excited and singing their way and all excited about how close they are to God when they're really, really much farther away. So it really is not profitable. The whole thing is not a gain. And God has no delight of it. There's no purpose in that. The purpose is only down here in the lowest, most outer crust of existence, where we find ourselves, where we walk around with super big egos. I don't mean necessarily arrogant egos in which we, flaunt our qualities over everybody else. I'm not talking about that too. But not only that, it's just our own, even if we're shy and quiet and don't really make much noise, but the fact that we're so perturbed with our comfort and ourselves and us being happy and so on and so forth. And we're constantly thinking about what I need instead of what am I needed for. That's really the whole discourse. The question every second in life is not what I need, but what am I needed for? The natural state of a human being, the natural state of physical existence is to cry out, I need, I want, I am, but that's a state that's just comes from misinformation, from distortion. So when we can clarify and we have the ability through the innate truths that our neshama, that our soul knows from a very deep place, that it's not as our external self would like to make us feel and experience. That's not true. And we always realize that because the more we give into our own dictates of pleasure and desires and wants, the more miserable we become on a deep level. That's just to become depressed. Every time we know we're doing the non-godly thing, and the more we're giving into it, the more we feed into it, even though it promises at first and initially, and sometimes, it could last a little bit. It promises some kind of a reward, some kind of a happiness, some kind of a thing, but it's not true. On a very deep core, inner level, it causes erosion, very deep erosion, a very deepness, because we know at our heart of hearts that it's not true and it's not real. And it's wasting existence and wasting life, because we have a real opportunity. We are fortunate that we are the lowest of the low. That's why we're fortunate, because the dials to operate the entire cosmos are not in the higher realms, they're in the lowest of the low. And the secret of it all is when we can provide the pleasure to God by overcoming that darkness of selfishness and bending ourselves to God's will continuously, and precisely where it hurts, precisely when we're not motivated, precisely when we're feeling on going the other way, and we don't do what we would like to do right now. We kind of make a sacrifice. We rise above ourselves and surrender our will to God's will, even though at the moment we're doing it, it's painful. We all know that deep inside there's a joy to it, but on the more experiential, external, everyday experience, it's painful. Because right now we're thinking, I could have had a good time. I could have done this. I could have done that. I could have relaxed. I could have been lazy. I could have just done. And instead, we have to push ourselves and fight it. But that's the pleasure. It's exactly over there when we are stimulating the most infinite pleasure of what? Of Levi. Because we're surrendering we're surrendering the yeshus, the something to nothingness. We're bending something to nothing. The nature of ourselves is to be something that is obsessed with its own beingness, and we're transcending ourselves to surrender to something bigger than ourselves. And that surrender is the point of pleasure, which makes, and why does that bring the creation to its purpose? Because that is so entertaining to God that he allows his very self to be drawn into the creation, into existence. And this world becomes a home for him. He moves in here. And that means that the entire chain of infinite worlds has a quantum elevation, an infinite, a boundless and unmeasurable elevation. Because prior to this investment of God's very self into the creation, ultimately the creation only comes from a little ray of God, and the ray is as nothing compared to the essence. And only the essence can only bear in this lowest world. And that's where it's at. So you overcoming your own whatever, our own thing, and being nice to our neighbor even when we're angry at them, or doing the little acts of charity and kindness and goodness when we're not in the mood, and when we're feeling selfish, and that's where it's at. At that moment, we're doing it all, and that's what Torah and mitzvahs is all about. Torah and mitzvahs are sometimes beautiful. Shabbos is beautiful. The holidays are beautiful. Prayer is beautiful. Yeah, sometimes, but once it gets to the nitty-gritty of it, and you really want to open the refrigerator and you can't, because for whatever reason you forgot to, it has an electric light, and by opening the refrigerator, you're going to cause the light to go on, and now you're sitting there and you're thirsty and you can't drink on Shabbos. or you have to do with lukewarm water instead of having a cold beer that you want, or a cold water or anything, and that's your sacrifice. Shabbos is not so beautiful at that moment. It's painful. And yet in that pain, because at that moment you're keeping Shabbos, that's the godliness. That's where it is meaningful to God. Now, today's days, we don't feel the electrifying light that has just now filled the space that you're in, because of the essence of God has now filled your space, and you have become one with God because you've opened up space for him to be, for his very self to be there. So we don't feel it, because if we would have felt it, then it wouldn't be any more a challenge. Again, that's the experience of the upper worlds. That's over there, they feel it. And precisely because they feel it, it's not entertaining to God, because then it's natural to do it. And what makes this so entertaining is that God gets a kick out of it when it's unnatural. That's the whole point. So it has to be painful. It has to be. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to be depressed doing it. That's not it. Judaism does not want any depression. We have to be thrilled. We have to dance, literally, every time. We have to dance and sing. But dance and sing when we do what? When we're not giving in to our egos and we're doing the godly thing. And that's really what the Torah is all about. Transcending our immediate self of wanting it our way, my this, my that, and doing it the godly way. Obviously, as we do that, we become healthier. We become deeply, deeply on a deep soul level satisfied. And of course, there are incredible moments of pleasure in doing it as well. But the general exercise is an exercise of self-transcendence, which has an element of pain to it, and yet that's where it's at. Okay, so that's kind of the discourse. Now we have to appreciate first, and he goes into a whole long explanation, how until we reach that lowest point and we start breaking the ego and the matter, the material substance of this world, and surrendering it to nothingness, why until that point everything is only a descent. No matter how high and how wonderful and how incredible luminous it is and how pleasure, whatever, it's all a horrific descent compared to what was before. And therefore it's not justified only when we, at the finals point of creation, which is down here, where it's not so pleasurable and not so natural for us to do the godly thing. And why only then is it where everything becomes, where it's all meaningful, where it gives meaning to all of creation and to all of, okay, that's the idea. So last week we learned, he explained how the soul in heaven was in a much higher state, and the soul coming down in the body loses the clarity it had in God. It loses its vision, he explained. It loses its ability to conceive godliness in a clear way. And whatever type of godly experiences we can have when our soul is in our body, and the service of Hashem in heaven was much, much higher and much deeper than the way the soul can serve God in the body in terms of quality. The service, its depth of service when the soul was not in a body is so much more intense than when we're in a body. Here we can only perform sluggishly, but yet this sluggish service is far more valuable and beautiful and creates a much greater sensation above than all the eloquence of the soul when the soul is in heaven. Okay, that's the idea. After he explained how the soul is so diminished when it comes down in a body, he starts to explain how the cosmic soul, the energy of God that has been that descends into the world to create the world, is also very, very much diminished from what it was in heaven. Okay. I have to read a little bit over from what we learned last week. I'm sorry, because there's a lot to learn, but I feel if I don't go over from that point, I think we're gonna lose it. Okay. So on the page, this is on Sefer Mamorim Tafresh Ayin Tes Ateres, page Kuf Ayin Tes, for those who want to look inside in the discourse. I'm going to read this fast because I'm saying I'm going to read it fast. I hope I don't get stuck. but I do plan on going through this quickly because we learned it already in last Thursday night class. Just like it is in the soul, that the soul experiences a great descent. So too, the divine ray, or the divine radiance that becomes the source for the worlds. It is also in a state of diminishment. In order to explain that idea, he's telling us like this. Number one, we should know that when God created this world, he didn't create the physical world immediately. There's a whole chain-like series of worlds that is the kind of the mediation process, or the intermediaries through which the physical world came about. Now, obviously, there's no power other than God. It's God working his way through all these levels to create our world. Now, one of the primary stations that is considered like the most pivotal medium to bring life into our world is the first known world, called the world of Atzilus. And he says, all coming into existence, the power of our creation to exist, is from the light of Atzilus. Meaning, it's not from the pure or Ein Sof. It's not from the pure infinite light, as it is completely unfiltered beyond Atzilus. Our world comes about, the creation of the finite creations of the physical material world, and not just the physical material world, but also a couple of predecessors of this world, spiritual worlds that precede our world, but they're also creations. So all those worlds together, their energy, the power that sustains them and makes them, is not the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light higher than Atzilus, but the Or Ein Sof as it is filtered through Atzilus. And that's why it's called the lights of Atzilus. Atzilus is called the world of emanation, and it's the lights of Atzilus that is the responsible for our world. The Nekol, the Savos, Atzilus, all comes from the light of Atzilus. As it states in Tanya, he's bringing a source for this for Tanya. This book we're learning is from the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shalom Dov Bed, Rebbe Nasham. He's quoting the Alter Rebbe, whose yard site is tomorrow night. As he explains over there, that the coming into creation is from the light, because it is similar to the luminary. Let's understand this for a moment. And he explains, and I'm going to go back. The real power to create ex nihilo, from nothing, something, is only in God's very self. No one else has that power. And let's understand this for a moment, just short. Every entity has a source. Okay? There's nothing that exists just on its own. Everything has a source. Okay? So sometimes the source is visible, sometimes the source is not visible. But everything has a cause. Whenever we see any phenomena, we wonder what causes it. There is a cause for everything. So, and then the cause, it too has a cause, and it has a previous cause, and so and so and so. We follow the cause. Everything is a chain, cause. And therefore, what's unique about the material, about physicality, in general, about any creation, is that especially the physical creation, is that it is called something from nothing. That means it's new. It doesn't have a source. It's not like it didn't evolve from something previous. It's a new entity, something totally new, which means something existing without a source to lean on. That means it exists from nothing. Now, to be able to create from non-being to nothing, that means to create an entity without a source, can only come from a being who it itself has no source. A being who has no source can create something that can bring about something that has no source. Obviously, the being that's bringing it out is its source, but he's creating it in a way that he's really, it is new. It doesn't have a previous existence that is more subtle, that you can say this in a higher level, like the light when it was still inside the source, something like that. It's new. So the power to affect that has to be also a being without a source. And that's the reason why the only one who can create can only be the source of sources, which is God's very self. Anyone less than God's very self has a source. When I say anyone, I mean any level of the divine progression. Anybody familiar with the a little Kabbalistic literature knows that there is an endless chain of emanations of lights that flow from different lights and divine energies, which are, parents give birth to children and children to children of divine lights, and great grandchildren and great goes through this long endless chain. These are all the conditioning of the divine light in the process of creation. But he's saying that all these levels have no power to create something new because they all have a source. This light comes from a previous light, and that light, in order to be able to create something without a source, it's only somebody who doesn't have a source, and therefore it's only Atzmos Ein Sof. It's only the essence of the Ein Sof. That's what he's saying. Shehu Levade, who is the only one, Bekoichoi v'Yacholta, who has the power and he has the capability, Lahavos Yesh Me'ayin, to bring into existence something from nothing, from absolute, where there's nothing there. As I said last week, God doesn't go to a junkyard to create the world. He didn't pick up shards and pieces and what do they call it? He didn't take any materials. He starts off with absolute nothing, and from nothingness he creates the world. And therefore, it's only the omnipotent power of God himself, who his existence is from within himself, not from anything preceding it. Now, if so, we would think that who is then, that seems to defeat what we were saying earlier. The power that is creating the world is the light of Atzilus. Atzilus is a consequence, is a level coming from a much high, that is produced by something higher. So how can we then say? That's why he's saying this power that God himself is creating the creation. He is empowering the creation to come into existence. He's doing it. He is the one doing it, but he is doing it through his light. That means he projects an energy, and that energy is called light, and that light is able to accomplish. Now the question immediately becomes, if that light is not him, it's only a ray of him and a light of him, then it has the same faultiness as we spoke earlier. It can't create anything because it has a source. The answer is the light has a unique characteristic. The characteristic of light is that it has to be attached to its source. Light is attached to its source. Light that's not attached to its source is not light. Light has to always be emanating from its source. Because light is attached to its source, for that reason, now again, we're using light just as an example. The physical light that we're thinking of is just a metaphor for the concept of light. So light is a projection, a revelation, a whatever it is. It's like an emanation of energy, right, so to speak. And that has to be attached to the source. Because it's attached to its source, light is always reflecting its source. In other words, it's not about itself, it's about revealing its source. For example, if you see light, you get to know about the source. Moonlight looks different than sunlight. And light from a candle looks different than light from the moon or the sun. And light from a beam of a car looks different than that as well. So that means you can look at light, and if you're familiar with, obviously, with different types of lights, you can right away tell, this is a halogen this is a fluorescent light, and this is this kind of light, this is that kind of light, this is moonlight, and this is sunlight. Because light, even though it doesn't have any of the substance of the source, it reflects the source. And because it reflects the source, it, I don't want to say mimics, it has within it what the source has. It's bringing out the source. Now, since the light of God reveals God, so the light, because the light is attached to its source and it reveals its source, it reveals that omnipotent power of God to create something from nothing. So how does God create the world actually from something through nothing? He emanates his light, and his light is responsible for creating the world something from nothing, and that light is a light of Atzilus. Okay, now, That's what the Alter Rebbe says over there. The light can bring into existence because it's attached to its source. And that's important to understand, because soon we're going to see that there's another type of godly effect, which are called vessels, not light. Now, vessels are precisely the opposite of light. They also, God is responsible. The God super being is responsible for the vessels. He is the source of the light, and he's the source of the vessels. But his relationship with the vessels are different than his relationship with the light. His relationship with the light is that the light is attached to him. His relationship with the vessels is precisely the opposite, that the vessels are not attached to him. In other words, he feeds the vessels in a mysterious, detached state. Because obviously he's attached to it. He wouldn't be attached to it, it wouldn't exist. But that's the point. It's almost like remote effect. Light is close, it's attached, and that's the business of light. It's supposed to be attached. It's supposed to be completely nullified to its source. It's supposed to be identityless. It's supposed to be just a reflection of the source. Vessels are supposed to be already something else, because that's the whole idea of a vessel, to create limitations, and the source doesn't have limitations. And in order for the source to produce limitations, the source emanates these limiting powers, but those limiting powers are not a reflection of the source, because the source is not limited. And even though the source is the source of the limitations, but the source is a source for the limitations, not by the source being limited, but by the source being so limitless that it can even limit itself. So the limitations as they are, the boundaries as they are not a reflection, because they are speaking boundaries. They are conveying boundaries. And the source is not bound, even though it has the power of boundaries as well, but that's not separated from his omnipotent power. He's not a mixture of boundaries and non-boundaries. He is a kol yochel, which means he's omnipotent for anything, and because of his utter lack of definition and limitation, he could be infinite and he could be finite. But the infinite is at least a reflection of what he is all about, that he's infinite. But the finite that emanates, that is also his product, is not a reflection of him. And that's why the vessels, the containers, which are the source of limitations and boundaries, are not dovok, they're not connected to their source. It's as if they exist independently from him. And therefore the vessels on their own would not have this power to create some, even though they're divine vessels, and they have divinity in them, but because their relationship to the super source is not in a state of connection, therefore they don't reflect the super source. They reflect themselves, but not their super source, and therefore they do not have the power to create something from nothing. The vessels can't create something from nothing, because to create something from nothing is only the being who is from nothing, meaning he has no source to him. His being is absolute. But light is able to do it, because light is a reflection of him, and therefore the light could do it. But the light, as we're going to see, if the light, which is a revelation of his infinity, which would just emanate and shine and extend his energy, then its effect of that light, if it's creating, would be just infinite. And therefore the creations would all be infinity and non-defined and not specified and not limited. So there has to be some kind of a interplay between the lights and the vessels, which means the light has the power of oomph to create. But why is it creating in finite? Is because the light is passing through, and as a result of it passing through, it is being impacted by the vessels. Now, when the light coming through the vessels is now extending and flowing to create, its impact is, on the one hand, it can bring from non-existence to existence. That's the quality of the light. But the quality of the vessels is also felt, is that the product is finite and not infinite. That's the idea, okay? This havos and the coming into being. So that's number one. And we have to understand that the actual responsible force for the cosmos is the light emanating from God. And that light has the power because it reflects the source. Now, point number 2. These lights, as they are first emanating as lights, let's call the first station Atzilus, even though there's a lot of levels before Atzilus, but that's where you can already speak of specific lights emanating from him. As these lights are still a reflection of him, they're too powerful to be a source for finite creation. In other words, they're too infinite. So these lights, only a ray of the light. So now you have to have a double ray. You have the light itself, which is a ray, and you have a ray of a ray, and that ray of the ray is actually the creative power of the cosmos. As he says, Vishavos, and that ray of the ray is able to create something from nothing, because since it's a ray which is attached to its source, which is the ray, again, ray number 2 is a reflection of ray number 1, and ray number 1 is a reflection of the source, and the source is omnipotent. So that omnipotence to create something from nothing is passed on even to ray number 2. But because it's ray number 2, it has already, as we're soon going to see, it was affected by the vessels, so that its impact will not be an infinite creation, but a finite creation. This havas and the coming into being, and that Atzilus is not from the essential lights of Atzilus, of the world of emanation, kima oretz Atzilus, only from the rays of Atzilus. Shehima kol makama oretz Atzilus. It's still a ray of Atzilus. It's still divine. And this ray, and this ray, as the ray of the ray number 2, as it becomes a source for the worlds, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, for this ray number 2, it is a great descent, compared to what it was in other words, the source of creations, the energy flow to create and sustain the world, is now radically diminished from one step higher when it was ray, not ray. Because what happens is like this: ray 2 is really first included in ray number 1, right? It's like a ray of the ray. So just like a ray of the sun is first in the sun before it emanates as a ray, so too ray number 2 is first in ray number 1. When it is in ray number 1, it is incomparably higher than when it is in ray number 2. Because in ray number 2 is going to say now it has already it's already in the realm of being counted. It's in the realm of number. And in ray number 1, it's still infinite and beyond number. And that's the idea. And again, where's he going with all of this? He wants to all prove how the cosmos and the spiritual cosmos, notwithstanding down here, there's a lot of stuff that we understand that our world needs a repair in our world. But we would think that up in heaven, that's beautiful. Now he's explaining how heaven and all the heavenly delights and all the experiences and all those worlds are all, it's a waste of time, as wonderful as it is, because there's no benefit in getting to that state, because over there it's only a diminishment, it's only lowered, it's only lost from where it was before. So this idea is explaining how the whole life source of creation, which includes all the experiences of all celestial realms, all of that is only from the ray number 2, which ray number 2 compared to ray number 1 before it was the same was much higher. So it didn't gain anything by coming down into creation. And he brings this too from his great-great-grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe says, the ray and the radiance that shines from God to bring into being and to enliven the world in general, and the creations that are limited, okay, and they have a limit and they have an end to their existence. So the Alter Rebbe says about that energy that comes down to be the life force of the worlds. In other words, from Atzilus and lower, to actually start the process of creation, because Atzilus is not really a creation, it's just an emanation. It's a world of emanations. The creation, which means a new substance that's not divine, starts Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, first spiritual creations and then physical creation. So you get the physical matter. So the Alter Rebbe says something very interesting about it. He says that this ray and this energy flow, that is the whole energy flow in the cosmos, Shaykh B'chinas Mispar, it could be numbered. But now contrast that. In other words, you can count its energy forces. It's within the realm of number. Obviously, number, it creates gazillion, but it's still, you can talk about numbers. In a sense, sometimes it explains it's still infinite number. But the very fact that you can talk about numbers, it's within the realm of counting. That's where you see already its limitation. But the Orein Sof in ray number 1 in Atzilus, that's above this contracted ray number 2. Again, and in the Orein Sof, it's a little tricky in the words over here again. Now the Or Ein Sof, that's higher than, again, in ray number 1, that is higher than the limited light that is emanate that it is producing. And that is higher, that's hayat, from that which descends to bring into existence and to enliven the worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiya. Who believe Mispah? Over there, it's still beyond number. V'hakavana, and now he's explaining it. This is a quote from his grandfather. V'hakavana, and the intention of that is the Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, the actual worlds themselves of creation, formation, and completion, which is the physical world. And when we say the Bria, Tzir, and Asiya, the worlds themselves, and the life force, the soul of this world, that which is the ray of the world of Atzilus, that contracts itself and actually expands into the worlds to sustain these 3 worlds. They're in a state of number. He's not saying they are number itself, but they're in the context of already number. V'atzilus and Atzilus itself, the world of Atzilus, the world of emanation, that is above the ray of Atzilus that comes down, that projects outwards to create. But Atzilus, as it is for itself, over there, who believe Mispar, over there, it's not within the realm of number at all. Okay. That's the quote from the Alter Rebbe. Based on that, what do we see? Once you're dropping from something that is not within the realm of number at all to a state of number, to the state of being able to count, that is already a unmeasurable and infinite separation. It has now dropped unmeasurably. So obviously it is much, much, much weaker than what it was before. Now, okay, that's what he says. Now he needs to, the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain this, that we should understand it. So he asks a question. We need to understand what What the Alter Rebbe just seemed to have said is that both the creation and the creative power invested in creation are both finite. Not both, they both are within the realm of number. Now, the creation, of course, within the realm of number. But he equates the divine energy that's within the creation also to be within the realm of number. So the Rebbe Rashab is asking, how can you equate the two? The thing that's coming into being with the power that's being it into being. How can you equalize that? And he's asking, maybe it's a finite power, and it is responsible for a finite creation. So he says you can't say that. Because if you're going to say that the maker, the power that's making, is in a state of agbolo, it's in a state of limitation, or mispar and number, how is it creating something new, as we discussed last week? What do we mean by that? The brio is chachas davar shenikra brio yashmei. Creation is something new, meaning something that you don't have. If you're calling it creation, it means creative. It means it hasn't been here before. If I take someone else's song and I just make a little twist on it, and I then call it my song, then I'm a thief, right? If I take someone else's speech, I'm not a singer, but if I take someone else's speech and I give it a little twist, and that's plagiarism, right? I'm being dishonest, right? I'm taking something that existed already. Now the truth is, every speaker and every writer and every artist and every we're all impacted, and it's not absolute creativity, because we have certain things that we've based on. This song is part of this genre of songs. This art is influenced by these artists, which means that the seeds of art and these particular things have been already there earlier, just that you created your own unique style. It's not absolutely new, totally new. Real creativity is hard to come about because everything is really influenced by so many other things. But the real creativity is God, who creates the world from nothing. There was nothing here, and He created. And that's the meaning of a creation, where it's not, you can't find this. As you see, this guy is a student from him, and you can find his poetry in his teacher's poetry. I mean, obviously, you don't see that same words, but you can see the seeds of it. You can see the seeds of the idea of the scientist and the scientist that lived before that. He had the kernels of the idea, and the teacher's ideas you can trace back to previous ideas, previous notions. And Einstein is like totally new, breakthrough. He's very creative, right? Real creativity. But again, even that is to a measure. The ultimate creative is when it comes from nothing, from absolute, from no to yeah. There isn't even a seed. There's nothing there to search because it's not there at all. That's Bria Yashmei. The Yedua is no. And the idea of Yashmei means it's not like the cause and effect. That's the whole point. Cause and effect is one thing is a cause for the next. And you can trace the effect to the cause. In cause and effect, it's not something new. And he gives the simple example of cause and effect. When I have an intellectual appreciation of something, then it's going to create an excitement that should follow. So when I understand and appreciate that this is wonderful, this something is really, really phenomenal, it's great, then I get excited and I want it. So the excitement is a derivative from the mind's appreciation of it. And you can find the excitement in the mind. In other words, that's what he's saying, is that the effect is not like a new entity that has not been there before. You can see it in the cause, which means even in the reasoning and in the idea, you can already sense in the mind an excitement, an intellectual excitement. And the intellectual excitement becomes an emotional excitement. So it's like like we spoke many times, a baby doesn't just pop out of nowhere. The baby first exists within the mom. In the same way, an emotional excitement always exists first, prior in the mind. The mind is pregnant with the excitement. Even though the emotions are separated from the idea that produced them, first the midos are included in the seichel, because you could actually find excitement in the idea. Over there, they're not midos, excitement that you can actually feel the energy of the excitement. It's very subtle. Over there, the dominance is the idea, is the intellectual, which is calm. The excitement is overwhelmed by the power of the idea itself. The excitement is subtle. It's in the background. It's not noticed. When it goes down into the heart, and usually it's after the mind kind of, the intensity of the idea kind of gets a little bit put to the back. You can allow your consequential emotion to fill the space of your consciousness. And now it's no more the thing, it's my excitement about the thing. So that one thing follows the next. In the initial state, the emotions are hidden in the idea. But then when it descends, drops from the mind into the heart, then the emotions take a front stage. They are felt strong. And in the emotion, you can feel the idea that's energizing it, but the idea is in the background. And the idea is hidden. But because this whole process is just that you've had, like the baby was part of the mother already, was in the mother, and now it just revealed itself. So that's every time cause and effect. The previous entity was already there before. And now it's just extracted, taken out, and developed. So if you take a piece of clay and I turn it into a pot, the potential for it being the pot was already in the clay. And now I just revealed it. So I took something from something, right? I didn't make anything really new. But the idea of a creation is really new. Because if not, what would we then say? That heaven and earth were once in a fetus state in God. That God once carried heaven and earth inside of him. And all creations, monkeys and bumblebees and frogs and goldfish and trees. Right? All these things were once in him, just very benign, and then they came out, and God would be made up of a bunch of stuff. Not that way. Hashem creates the world from nothingness. It's not inside of him. He's simple with utter simplicity. You can't say about heaven and earth that they were included in their source. And they were revealed only from the concealed to the revealed. They all came into existence in a manner of newness. Now this is all part, once he's established that, he's going back now to what he said earlier, to a question that he's going to ask. We are now talking about the idea that the Alter Rebbe said his great-grandfather said, that what? That the power that emanates to create is in a state of limitation. We use the word that it's in a state of being counted, numbers. Everything that is limited is already something. The limitations of it make it a thing. Then it's already in a state of something. Because every limitation makes it into something. And if it's something, it can create something. Because one something can create another something. Unless it's cause and effect. Then it's not creating anything, it's just drawing it out. Right? This is hidden in this, and I'm just extracting it. But to create a defined entity can't create a totally new something that is utterly new. It can't do that. Only nothingness which means something that is not limited and finite and set as something, ultimately that nothingness is referring to the creative power of God, who's not defined by anything. He could innovate and create something. So again, if we say, that's what he's bothered now, if we say that the creative power of the world is already something, it has limitation, that means, because you're saying it's already within the realm of counting means it has an end. That means that if it has a limit, that has a limitation. Every limitation makes it into a thing. If it's a thing, it can't create, because you can't have yesh me-yesh, something, you can only have yesh me-ay. So then, that's his question he's asking. How do we say then that the creation is new? Every something has to have it. Is new from what? From nothingness. Once a thing from another thing, where one thing where the two things have absolutely no relationship to each other, cannot be. Only from nothingness. This idea is explained and proven elsewhere. And like the philosophers have said, to create the matter from spirit, you don't have a greater this is a demonstration of something from nothing, because spirit doesn't have the subtle the matter inside of it in a subtle form. Spirit is completely removed from matter, and matter is utterly removed from spirit. So how does spiritual phenomenon translate into matter? That takes it takes a omnipotent power to do that. It takes a nothing to accomplish that, not a something. A something which is finite can't do that. The nothingness, which means the power that has no definitions and boundaries, could bring that about. Now going back, but if we say that this energy, which is supposed to be the nothing, is already counted, that means it's not nothing, and it's already something. And if it's something, how can it create? Upidish ayin, and when we say nothing, who had that ayeshes, we don't mean it's not real. It means it doesn't have a had that ayeshes. It doesn't have a substance of the head agbola, and it doesn't have limitation. And therefore, the sages say, therefore the sages say, if all the people of the world, as I discussed this last week already, with all their creativity, with all their abilities, with all their forces, everybody would bring whatever their capabilities are to the table, we would all work in harmony. Imagine getting the entire world on one project, from the biggest scientists, the biggest engineers, everybody together. And the most powerful people and the wealthiest people. You have all the money, you have all the technology, you have all the brain power, everything. Everybody's in on the same thing. And all the manpower, because everybody's willing to work, the laborers, everybody. And if you have all the people on the planet, everybody would get together, and they would have to create one wing of a mosquito from absolute nothing. Okay? You can't take the DNA of a previous mosquito. You can't take the genetic code. You can't, clone it or whatever. You have zero, nothing to create it from. Even that they couldn't make. That's how the sages put it out. Even what seems to be the most minor detail of a creation, that God created 1 billion something from nothing, but he can and no one else can. The coming into being of the something is only the power that is omnipotent, that has to be infinite, and therefore it can't be a something. Therefore, how can you say that it's numbered? Once it's numbered, it has definition. to bring about something. As stated elsewhere. So he's questioning the Alter Rebbe, his great-grandfather's idea. He's questioning it. How can you say, what did we say? That in order to create the world, God emanated light. And then that light number one, emanated light number two. And the difference between light number two and light number one is that light number one doesn't have any number. It's a reflection of the infinite. But light number two is already in the realm of number. If it's in the realm of number, it's already something. And if it's the realm of something, how can it be the creative life force? That's the question. Now he's going to ask the question on the other end. We're saying, okay, light number two has number. We'll accept that. We asked the question on it, because if that's the case, how can it? But now let's go back to light number one. We were saying that ray number one is beyond number. But hold it. Atzilus. Everybody knows. In Atzilus, there are 10 Sephirot. If you say, I mean, he's specifying 10. It's very, very numbered. So he's asking the question on both ends. This that you say that this is number, how can it be number? It has to be infinite. And this that you say that Atzilus is really infinite, how can you say it's really infinite? There too there is number. The opposite is also questionable. This that we say that Atzilus, that is higher than the constricted light. That is higher than this limited light that it is emanating to bring about and to enliven the three lower worlds, B'riyatzi and Asiyah. Who believe Mispar, we say it's without a number. Atzilus is 10 spheroids, b'mispar, very, very much a number. V'chol mispar hagbala, and every number is a limitation. Obviously, if you're counting one and then two, it means this is different than that. If it's all one, and obviously there has to be some defining markers that define this, that make this one and this two. And there already, means that it has a limitation. If it's not limited, then where exactly are the borders between one and two? So how can you count one and two? And specifically, you're giving it, that is even if you have infinite possibilities. The fact that you're counting 1, 2, 3 is already a limitation. And then that you're emphasizing that it's only 10, that is limitation within limitation. The Kolshkin Essa spheres, how much more so that there are 10 spheres? As says in the book of formation, right, a book attributed to even going back as far as Avram Avinu. It says Eser v'loy Teisha, that there is 10 attributes and not 9. V'loy Achadasar and not 11. So Atzilus has a limitation and a number. I'm sorry, Yesh B'Atzilus Hagbala. Atzilus has a limitation. Mispar and a number, yeah. V'hu Keifel Hagbala. And last time that's why we had to learn the whole page over again, because this line I didn't know, I couldn't figure out last week. This is a double limitation. What is a double limitation? The mispar arezu agbala, just number itself is already a limitation. And number two, even if it would be an endless numbers, even if the numbers would be an uncountable number, it's already, the fact that we're in the realm of numbers is already a limitation. The agbalas on this part. And then you have the second element, the doubling of the limitation is that you have a limited number. Eser dafka only 10. The idea is as follows. So we have to answer two questions. Number one, we have to explain how Atzilus, even though it has numbers, is really infinite. And then we have to explain that the ray of Atzilus that comes down to create, even though it's limitless, because if it wouldn't be limitless, it wouldn't be able to create, yet it has a limitation. Is it? So we have to yet it's within the realm of number. So how do we do that? So in the book Avodas HaKodesh from Meir ben Gabbai, a great Kabbalist, so he writes the idea that I was discussing earlier. As he gives a very good characterization, if you can say characterization, on the concept of Atzilus. And he says like this: the Ein Sof U'Shleimus HaDikul. the infinite one, Ein Sof means the infinite one, the one without an end, he's perfect. If he's perfect, means he can't have any chisarn, he can't have anything that he's any problem, any defect. He's got to be infinite. Because once you say that he's finite, he's not perfect. There are things that he can't do, or that he can't reach, or that he can't. There can't be a limitation on. Okay. What the Avodas HaKodesh, however, explains that included, and this is what we discussed earlier, including in that infinity has to also be a power to restrain. Because if he would be just a boundless force that would have no power of restraint, then that too would be a limitation on him, because he would be limited in being infinite. So for instance, he would only be able to produce infinity, he would never be able to produce finite, because he's only infinite. Like a person, it's always good, in between people, the tall guy is always like, he can see. Everybody else is squishing, can't see. The tall guy and amongst all people, he gets to see all the way out. So he's got like the great advantage, but the tall guy can't hide. So when people, if the Kazakhs are coming, and you got to run to hide, the strong guy, the big guy, his feet are going to stick out from under the bed. He's going to get caught. That's his limitation. So he's limited by being tall. The short guy is, but the short guy is limited that he can't see. Now the tall guy can see because he can breathe amongst the crowd. His head is above. So you see, each one has got a quality. So if God is only infinite, so you have to say that including in his infinity is his finite. But as I mentioned earlier, at this stage, in the Ein Sof, you can't differentiate between the finite and the infinite. It's just one glob, so to speak, of potential, of infinite potential. Where does it start to become differentiatable? Finite and infinite. That's in Atzilus. In other words, the finite potential of the infinite being goes unnoticed or undetected. We can philosophize that it's there, we don't see it. Where is its first emergence as, that's God's defining power to limit? Where the first revelation of it is in the world of Atzilus. Now we know in Atzilus there are attributes. And the attributes are comprised from two factors, lights and vessels. The vessels of Atzilus, they are the first detection of God being finite, or God manifesting in finitude, because it's a vessel, and a vessel, a container, it's contained, it's defined. So God's first limitations, visible limitations, are the 10 attributes, but only the vessels of them, the lights that flow through them, are still is really still the simple infinite light. And that's what he's going to use to explain this, that we say that Atzilus has numbers, 10. He's going to say that's only the vessels. The light is not within the realm of numbers at all. It's completely infinite. And when he said earlier that Atzilus is limitless, he's referring to the lights of Atzilus. If that's the case, then we're going to have to say that when the light travels past Atzilus, so to speak, whatever that means, and drops into a lower dimension, into the next stage of existence, which is the three worlds of creation. And over there, we're saying it's numbers. We're going to have to say that affects even the light. There too, there's lights and vessels. And over there, even the lights are already impacted by, have some restriction on it. And that's what the Alter Rebbe means when he says Atzilus is infinite. But like we said before, ray number 1 is infinite. But ray number 2 is already number. Ray number 1 is only the ray, but the vessels of Atzilus, there is number, in Atzilus as well. Again, the Ein Sof Ein Sof is the perfect of perfection. Just like he has the power in the infinite, so too he has the power of the finite. If you're going to say that he only has the power in the infinite, and he doesn't have power in the finite, then you're limiting him. And the power of finite, of limitation, that is first detectable in him, and Akalim, the Esespheres Tatsilos. These are the vessels, the containers of the 10 Sphirot of Atzilus. And this is the limitation of Atzilus. Only the vessels. And over here we say 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. And here is where we spoke earlier that there is double limitation: the fact that it's number and the fact that it's a specific number, a countable number, but it's only in the containers. But the light, it's still the simple infinite energy that flows. And there's no difference in it than the light that flows in the container of Chachma, or the light that flows in the container of kindness. The light is equal by all of them. And the Hagbala and the limitation is only in the vessels. And on that is what we mean when we say that Atzilus has an element of number. That's in the containers. But when we say Atzilus, that the Alter Rebbe said earlier that Atzilus is without a number, that's in the lights. Well, if he's en nicha, and all of this will explain, will be good. This, that the root and the source of Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. Now we'll understand when we say that when we drop down lower from Atzilus, and we're dealing already with the actual energy that sustains and creates the world, and we'd say it's a limited power. It's not the lights of Atzilus itself, it's the lights of Atzilus that are coming further. Why? The Malchus Atzilus. Because the main transmitter of Atzilus further down into the next worlds are not the lights of Atzilus, but the containers of Atzilus, the vessels of Atzilus. Now, it can't be only the vessels we're soon going to see. It's light shining through those vessels. But over here, the light shining by the vessels are already limited by the vessels, as opposed to in Atzilus where the lights are still utterly simple. So the main, firstly saying is that the main transmission from Atzilus to Bria is the vessels. As it's explained that there are 30 vessels in Atzilus itself, there's lights and vessels. From all the vessels of Atzilus, the main idea of vessels is in the lowest sphere of Atzilus. In other words, in the dynamic of the spheres itself, which every sphere is light and vessels, in the 9 sephirot, the 9 upper spheres of Atzilus, the dominant element of all the spheres is the lights. In Malchus, which is the lowest, Malchus is primarily an entity of vessels, of containers. And since Malchus is primarily an entity of containers and vessels, so any influence of Malchus is going to be very vessel-like. And since the main energy flow from Atzilus to the next world is through the last station, which is Malchus, that's why its influence, it's very kalimdik. And it explains, there's 30 vessels from Malchus that go down lower. 10 of them are responsible for the first world, the world of Bria, and it becomes the life force of the world of Bria. 10 of those vessels extend lower and become the life force of the world of Yetzirah, and 10 of those vessels, which is a lower world of Bria, of creation, the world of formation. And then finally, 10 of those vessels come down even lower to become the life force of the world of Asiya. And the lower 10 are the most external element of Malchus. Okay. Now, Kalim is already in Mugbal, and that's why we're saying that the power that's flowing further is Mugbal, is limited. But that doesn't answer the question. That just tells you, okay, it's limited. Well, you still beg with the question. If it's limited, how is it creating a creation. How's it creating how is it creating something from nothing? If it's from the vessels, if it's and they're more than that, we spoke earlier. Vessels are the containers. Their relationship with the source is not in a direct connected state. That was the whole idea that we spoke about in the beginning of the class today. The lights are attached, and therefore they can reflect the power, and they can carry the omnipotent power of the source to create something from nothing. But the containers, the very fact that what are they about? They're about finitude and limitation. So they're not in a state of attachment. Because if they would be in a state of attachment, they would be infinite. A source is infinite. At least visibly infinite. And if the vessels would be in a state, then they would be reflecting, right? The fact that they are finite, stiff, so to speak, means they're presenting limitation and boundary, which is not the idea of a limitless being, even though this is really a part of the infinity of the Ein Sof. But so its connection to its source is not an open connection. In other words, it is seemingly, at least, severed from source. And if it's severed from source, then it's not reflecting anymore. This is how can it create? And the answer is, he's going to explain in a moment, it is not itself creating. It's creating through the light that's flowing through it. The light with the vessels. Okay, but also it's back to the light. And the light is really still, the light is light, and light is connected. And if light is connected, so it has that omnipotent power from not just the first ray, but the first ray that's reflecting the source, which really is the power to create something from that. But hold it, if we're now then speaking of the light, and we're saying that it's infinite, then it means that, and that's why it can create something from nothing, then how is it different than the light of Atzilus? Light of Atzilus is also infinite. The vessels of Atzilus are also finite. If we're talking about vessels, they're both finite. If we're talking about lights, we're saying now that they're both infinite. So what's the Alter Rebbe comes and says there's a difference. The life force of creation is within the realm of number. The life force as it is in Atzilus is not within the realm of number. But hold it. Where's the difference between Atzilus and lower? If both are the same. If you're considering the vessels, they're both finite. If you're considering the lights, they're both infinite. Okay, we're going to see. We're getting there. But isn't this awesome that we can sit over here as our tiny little pipsqueak minds and contemplate such vast, incredible concepts and ideas that are shared with us about the deepest divine truths and realities. And this is what was given to us through these great, incredible masters and teachers. But now the question is, if it's what's really extending downward from Atzilus is only the vessels, so how from the finite vessels of Atzilus, number one, how will from a power mugbal d'Atzilus, hagavul debiyah, how will it produce a different type of gavul? The limitations of Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. It has to produce something new because it has to produce real creations. And another thing, how do we refer to as Bria Yetzir? Number one, how does this finite power have the power to produce? That's number one. Question number two, we say regarding the creations that they're all Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. Now, if we say there's something from nothing, what is the definition of nothing? As we spoke earlier, nothingness means it's not a definable, specified. And if we're saying it's kalim, the vessels, they are specified. But Inyanu, so the explanation is as follows. The kalim d'Atzilus, the kalim of Atzilus that we said now, the 30 kalim of Malchus d'Atzilus that we're saying are responsible and the life force of the creation, ein behem hakoyach lahamis. they are powerless to create. They can't bring it to be. Remember that. The only one who can really create is only the light. And the light can only create not because of its own power. It's because light is just a reflection of source. That's the secret of light. Light is cleaving to its source. Again, disconnect block the source, the light disappears instantly. There is no light without source. And because it's a reflection, it's attached to the source, therefore it reveals the source, and it expresses the qualities of the source. And va'kelim, but the containers, they don't have that quality. Remember we said that? That's what we're talking about. The kelim are not in a state of dveikus to their source. It's almost like God does reveal them, but he kind of reveals them in a way of like almost remote from him, disconnected from him. Even though all it is, it's really him, but it's like him kind of amputating his finite ability from himself to show them as an independent entity. It's not independent, but as finite versus infinite. Now, this idea that when we say the creation is not from the vessels, it's from him, where do we see that? Because in Tanya, he explains that what? That he and his garments are one, lahavas b'hem, to create with them. So, which is really a quote from the Zohar. He and his garments are one. But that's what it says in Zohar. The Alter Rebbe explains one in what sense? To create through them. The garments are considered these containers, these vessels. They're the garments. He is the energy flowing in the vessels. That's the lights. So again, in order to create something from nothing, what does it say? What does it say? What's the phrase? He and his garments are unified, merge and unify, or not even merge. They are essentially one. I can get into that right now. To create something from nothing. Lahavos b'hem, to bring about with them, v'al yadam, and through them, ma'ayin liyesh, from nothing to something. So what do you see from here? Shamahav, the real beinger, the one who's being the beingness, that's he himself. And the light has no definitions. It's still nothingness. Nothingness in the sense that it has no definitions. And that's why we say creation is what? The creation is, who's responsible? The creation is yesh, something, from nothing. So then we are attributing the existence of the creations not to the vessels. The vessels are there, we're going to see. They're very, very important. They're pivotal. But we're attributing the existence of things not to the vessels, but to the one who's enclosed in the vessels, which is he himself. The Zeome'ayin, that's the nothingness. Which is not yesh. The vessels are already something, but this is not. This is the power of the Ein Sof, literally. It becomes unified. Im garmuhu, with the vessels. Now, what's happening? The energies and the lights of Atzilus that we said before, ray number one, purely Ein Sof, are now flowing through the containers of Atzilus. Those containers are ambiguous. On the one hand, they're divine. They're the powers, they're the finite energies of God. So they're divine. But on the other hand, they're already considered something, because any limitation is already something, and they're limitation. But they are called, it's almost like God becoming something. It's not a creation yet. It's like God emanating as something. That's why they are called Yesh HaNetzal, the something that is emanated, not the something of a creation. Now, when the lights get married to these vessels, to these containers, merge with these containers, So the consequence of that is that they will produce from the something that is an emanation, the something of creation. Now, that's a whole new something. And it's not like the something of creation was once a fetus inside the previous stage, the something of emanation. No, this is divine and this is creation. It's not like you can trace it. It's something from nothing. And the power to do that needs the energy that's omnipotent. So what do you even need the vessels? Let just the light work. The answer is without the vessels, then these some things wouldn't be the way they are. They wouldn't be limited. In order for them to be limited, a limited, fixed, definable creation, there has to be limitation on it. So there has to be limitation placed on the light. So the light is working via the vessel. So there has to be an interplay over here, a paradox, really, of infinity and limitation working together. The limitation, the infinite is needed the whole time to bring out new being from non-being. So you need an infinite power. But that infinite power has to work within the construct of a finite stream somehow. And that's the vessel. So the vessel is contributing the finitude, and the light is contributing the power to make it be. Liyos miyesha netzal, to bring from the something that is emanated, ha'gabola hanatzeles, the limitation of the emanation that has only been emanated. It should produce the next stage, which is hagavul debiyah, real limitation, which is the limitations of the three lower worlds, bria, yitzir, and asi. Avalam ahava, the real power, ubchenas ihu. That's the energy, because it's light, and light is a reflection of, as we said earlier, of the source, God's very self. Which is v'zeu she'amar, and this is what it says in the pasuk. Bereishis bara Elokim. Elokim. Now, in general, we know that the names of God, Havaya, Yudke, Vavke, the Tetragrammaton is a name that reflects the lights. Elokim is the name of God that is related to the containers and the vessels. Again, in a broad, this is a very, very painting with a very broad brush. You get more specifics, you can find Elokim in the lights as well, and you can find Havaya in the vessels. But so when it says Bereshis bara Elokim, that Elokim created, so we are attributing creation to the vessels. We said earlier, the 30 vessels of Atzilus come down to create. She'esavus im Hashem Elokim, that the coming into being is from the name of Elokim, because that's the finite creation. But he says, it's not Elokim acting independently. It's Havaya coming through Elokim. It's the power of Havaya working through Elokim. The Havaya, the Zeu Davka M'Shem Havaya, is the name of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Ha-Mesiyached M'Shem Elokim, that joins with the force of Elokim. And there's a verse, many verses that point to that. He's bringing one of them. Rabois Asisa. Many you created, many you made. Ato Hashem Elokai. You Hashem, which is the Tetragrammaton, Elokim, Elokai, my God. So you see the interplay between, in order to bring about Rabbi Sisa, the many that he's been made, which means finite creations in which each one of this has its differentiable borders and different boundaries and characteristics that define it in its own space, and that's how we can have a pluralistic world. How Havaya Elokim, a singular energy of Havaya, but coming through the containers and the vessels of Elokim. The multitudes of creations that are divided, to bring it into existence. This works from Havaya and Elokim. This is from him as he joins together with the vessels, the Malchus Tatzilus of Malchus of Atzilus, and that's how creation comes about. But now we still have to figure this out. So now, after all this talk, so the energy flow that is now flowing and the sending and response, is it finite or not finite? Is it numbered or not numbered? Ray number 2. Yeah, the joined together lights that are coming through the vessels. Now, as it is affecting creation, finite or infinite. In order to create ex nihilo, it has to be infinite. But we said earlier that, so now he explains. The root and the source of Bria, Yetzia, and Asiya is number. So first he says, the Malchus Atzilus. That's the Kalim. The Kalim, the vessels of Malchus of Atzilus, the Elokim element of it, that's Mispar, number. Va'atzilus shalamayla ma'ara, who believe Mispar. And Atzilus that is above this, is without, above the ray, is without a number. So we'll say it like this. The vessels are numbers. And the lights, which of Atzilus, are not numbered. That's how we'll kind of resolve it. But he says immediately, no, Masha Amar Rabbeinu Nishmas Ein. But this that the Alter Rebbe says, Shahaziva Ora HaMeir Me'ita Yizbarach. That the actual light, the ray, not just the filtration that filters the ray, but the ray itself, which is the power. He said over there that is Me'ita Yizbarach, Lahavos Lahachos, to bring into existence, and that's not the vessels, that's the energy. That is in a state of number. Nira, it appears that once you pass Atzilus and you go through the vessels of Malchus, the last vessels of Atzilus, to shine the lights down in, then even the lights themselves are already different than the lights that are higher in Atzilus. These lights are already in a state of number. We have to say, and that's what he's explaining here. The oras pchenas ihu, the very we said before, ihu, him and his garments. The garments we know are the vessels, but the him, that's the lights, because that's a reflection of him. But the him, as he is filtering himself through the vessels, is already accepting some level of measure of limitation. The oras pchenas ihu sheba mahayichu the ihu him garmu. The light that, once the light is now passing through these vessels, picking up the definitions and characteristics of the vessels, hu b'pchenas mispar, it is in a state of number. Hagam shezah oras ihu, even though it's still a ray of him. Since it's coming through the containers, it has already relationship to number. But the him as he is, prior to his filtration through these vessels, so then we would say something like this. The lights of Atzilus that are in the containers of Atzilus, but haven't passed through them yet. It's just a light that is contained in those vessels. Over there's no number yet. It's pure infinity. Once it's in a state of actualization into the 3 lower worlds, that's when it's in a state of number. Because the energy flow that's actually making contact with the creation has to be finite. Because if it's infinite, then the worlds couldn't contain it. And therefore, so either it would result in another creation or it would destroy everything. So it has to soften up. But here's the case. But hold it. But if it's softening, it's once it's not fine. Once it's not infinite anymore, it loses its infinite potency. So how's it creating something from nothing? So therefore, he's saying the power of its impact is on two levels. The primary effect that it's having, the primary power to bring about creation from non to yet, that's not the light that's passing through the vessels. That's still the light that is in the vessels or above the vessels, or actually in the vessels. But again, the vessels of Atzilus, before it leaves Atzilus, before it's going out through Malchus, is still infinite. And at that point, that's like kind of above our world, but yet it's not enough inside the creation to blow the creation up, but it's close enough to the creation, so to speak, to impact it. And its impact is an infinite effect. The infinite effect is to bring it from non-being into beingness. But that power is still hovering above. It's almost like what we say a lot of times, Soviv Kalam. It's an energy that is still higher than the creation. It's not contained. It's not the immanence of God. It's still a transcendence. So God is impacting this world through two powers, an immanence and a transcendence. The transcendence is the main force to bringing, yes, the non-beingness into beingness. The immanent force that is not transcendent, that is actually the force within, is responsible for the actual character of what will be created. And that is the finite aspect of it. And again, it's not because of the energy itself, it's because the energies are now coming through the vessels, and the vessels are imparting this kind of limitation onto the energy. But however we're gonna look at it, it's already much weaker. And that's why it's resulting in what type of creation is being produced, a finite creation. So there is a power that's transcendent. That's the light pre-filter. Even in the Kalim. The Kalim themselves are finite. The light that's in the Kalim are not, again, they're finite, but they're God as God is manifesting in infinitude. That's the vessels of Atzilus. The light that's in it is pure infinity. Even while they're in the vessels, they're still pure infinity. And from that place is where they're impacting the power for creation to be from not to be. And that's the main power of the maker. And that's how resolves the question that the power to bring the world into existence from non-being has to be an infinite power. And it is infinite. But then the light continues through the vessels to define and again, we're talking about simultaneous and on two levels of something like that, right? The is without number. And now he puts it in these words. The power of the maker that's in the thing that has been made. When you're making something, you're infusing some of your energy into the thing you're making. So whatever it is that you are actually transmitting into the thing can't be bigger than the thing you're putting it into. Because it's the electricity that's flowing inside of it. It'll blow it up. So that in terms of God, the power of the divine that's actually binifal, that's resonating into the creation or descending into the creation, is in a state of number. The koyach hapoyel atzmai, but the power of the maker, the force itself, it's like the force of the maker. It's been the craftsman that's making. We put it this way: the craftsman's power is infinite, but the craft is finite. So the craft itself, the energy that's flowing in the craft is finite from an infinite craftsman. The power of the maker, who believe Mispar is without number. The Indian in koyach hapoel benifel. Oh, now, even now, it's getting very, very subtle over here. Now, even when we say the power of the maker that goes into that is embedded in the creation, which on that we say is in a state of number, is limited, we're not talking about what is completely enmeshed in the creation. Okay, what he's going to do now is going to do another surgical procedure between already in that which is already numbered. There is also two dimensions. There is what becomes completely imbued and invested within the creation, and there is a power that's present in the world, but yet above it. And that's what he's talking about over here. So he's really speaking on three levels. There is the power of the maker itself, the craftsman itself is an infinite power. There's the power of the craftsman as he is doing his craft. That has some level of number. It is within the context of number, of counting. And then there is the third level, which we didn't even talk about yet, is the energy that is actually enclosed completely in the creation. And I don't know how you would put that in terms of the craftsman. I don't know. Okay, we need some more clarity in this, but let's see. What I don't mean over here is Shemos labish mamish ba'nifal, that which is becoming completely enclosed in what is made. It's only that which he is. We're talking about an energy that has contracted itself to be a source for the creation, but not literally invested in the creation. Not what literally goes in. We're talking about a stage where it's a source for the finitude, but not yet enclosed in the finite creation. And it appears to me so, he says. Why? The koyach hapoel shabo lifoil. Oh, so he says it's like this. The koyach hapoel shabo lifoil. So the three powers are as follows. There is the power of the craftsman himself, infinite. Then there is the craftsman and then there is the craftsman that when he does his craft. So then he's infused. Then he's taking his power. Let's say someone throws a ball. You take your power of your strength, and that strength you're releasing that power, and that power is carrying the ball. So the power that is released from the thrower of the ball or the thrower of the stone, that force, the force that comes out, that's stage number 3, which actually is emitted. And then, let's put it this way. The pitcher, when the pitcher is sitting in his house, or he's sitting in the bullpen, I'm using this as a total example, totally. I'm just using the pitcher in the bullpen, he's not yet doing anything, he's waiting. Then it's infinite, this power. The pitcher, when he's taking the ball and he's going to throw it, there's an adjustment. That adjustment it's still the pitcher, the power in the pitcher, but the power in the pitcher as he is going to throw the ball. And being that he has to throw it a finite distance, therefore he's measuring that power already to be a measured, so it's a measured expression of his infinite power, if the pitcher would be infinite. And then the third level is the energy that's actually going out and on the ball once the pitch has been released. And the ball is the force that's now carrying the ball. 3 stages in that energy. The energy as it is the pitcher prior to him selecting or defining. I think it's always that way. Every time you have to do something, and it's a specific projection. So you're there's a certain adjustment in that energy, and it's already, the energy has now descended. It now left its greater pool, its greater potential. It is already diminished. And the actualization of it is a second level of diminishment because it left its source and it's much weaker. And these are the 3 forces that there are in the Koach HaPoel by God. The Koach HaPoel Shabo Lifoil Ubebchinas Mispar. The power of the maker that's coming to effect is in a state of number. The Koach HaPoel Atzmai, the power of the craftsman himself, or the effector itself, before it's coming to do something, will believe Mispar without number. All of this is all to tell you, again, going back, how the energy that is invested in creation is in a state of great descent from where it was earlier. Remember I said earlier that Leah, that's the source of the divine. He says, now my husband will accompany me. I said, I told you at the beginning of the discourse, it's all the divine energy, this is all the power of the creative power in creation is the feminine energy of God, the Shekhinah energy. That's the power that is already the Malchus, the Kalim, and even the Or that's going in the Kalim but is affected by the Kalim. It's all Shekhinah, it's all that element. And that is on a great fall and a great diminishment from what was before. The Nimtza comes out as a Yerida Gedoyla Ba'ara. This is a very great descent in that light. In other words, the pitcher stepping out of the bullpen to go actually pitch a pitch, that itself is a great diminishment of his energy. And by God, obviously, right? The Kamoisha he b'Atzilus, as it is still in Atzilus, he b'Bchinas Belim Mispar. Over there, it's completely without a number. Or Kamoisha b'Bchinas Makar L'Beyal, but when it goes down to become a source for Bria, Tzir, and Asir, for the 3 lower worlds, b'Bchinas Mispar, it is in a state of number. Or Mispar L'Gaba Belim Mispar. And when you measure something that is numbered compared to beyond the whole ability of beyond number, that means it's completely not within the context of number, is an infinite gap. Ube'en Aroch has no comparison. Now, that is true even in the descent of the pitcher to get up the pitch. In our case, God, as he is defining the energy from its infinite source to prepare himself, so to speak, to create and to effect. Now, the final stage, the energy that is actually descending and being literally imbued in the creation, that is already double diminished. The kolshken hakayach eliki, and how much more so the power of the divine shebo b'bchinas eslapshus b'nevram, that is really enclosed in the creation. That really is not only in a state of number, but it is very comparable and similar to the substance of the creations. And that idea is what he's going to explain now, which is a very interesting idea. Every spiritual power that encloses in itself in whatever it is that you're putting that power in, adapts and becomes very similar to the thing that it is affecting. Kamal Derech Moshe gives an example. We all have a power of our mind, our intelligence, intellectual power of the soul. But the soul can only use its intellectual power, at least not it can. It's when the soul is in heaven, it has no problem. But down here, the soul's intellectual power will only be activated only through a physical brain, through the gray matter up here. Now, that gray matter, even though it looks pretty much the same by everybody, is not the same. Obviously the very genetic build of every human being is different. And that obviously affects also the genetic build of the brain. It's different. Obviously, not necessarily we can see the differences, but it's different. And depending on the subtleties of those differences will depend a lot of times on the clarity of a person's mind and the sharpness of a person's mind. Why? You'll say, what's the difference? The gray matter of your head. What's the difference? The physical is where you brainstorm. It's the mental, spiritual powers of a soul. It's a spiritual being. So what's the difference? What the container is. But since we're dealing with light, with energy that is enclosed in a vessel, every enclothement means that you have to fit yourself to the thing that you're being enclosed in. You want to fit into a pair of pants, you got to lose some weight to fit into the pants or to fit into the skirt. If you don't fit, you don't fit. So the spiritual energies have to fit themselves into the physical container. And that means they have to adapt. And the adaptation is a constriction and a limitation. You can bring a very phenomenal thing. He says, if you want to have a sharp mind, eat refined foods. If you eat heavy foods, it'll clog your brain. You won't be able to think straight. People that have to utilize their minds should be very careful with what they eat, because the more refined the food that they're eating, the more clarity they have in their head. Why? Is the food the answer is your food impacts your physical brain. We are what we eat, and that affects the whole body. The purity of the blood, and so on and so forth. And the more refined that the brain is, a lot of times it can be, if a person ate heavy food and so on and so forth, it can create a fog and a mist in their head. And if they ate and they more watched what they eat and they ate the right way, that's because of the marriage between the spiritual intelligence and the physical brain, physical matter. So what do you see from here? That when something is enclosed in something else, it really does impact. The vessel impacts them. And in that sense, the energy of the divine that literally registers and comes into the creation to create and to be fully enclosed in the world, not hovering and transcending from above, but it becomes very, very much like the creation. And obviously, that is an enormous descent for infinite power and infinite energy. The light of the intelligence that encloses itself in the chomer, in the substance of the brain, is similar to the chomer, the substance of the brain, if dry or wet. That means, people have different types of brain in terms of its substance. Which also has to do with the food that you eat. Which that impacts the substance material of the brain. That's going to influence the way you understand, grasp things. It says in books, the Baal Sichliim, that people who are engaged in intellectual pursuits shouldn't eat coarse foods. It causes a coarsening of the brain. It doesn't allow the clarity, the shining, the light of the mind to shine. It also has to do. Some people have every time they look, they're very critical in their mind. Every single thing they look at, they always find the problems. And there are other people that always see the solutions. They always see the potentials. Right? They're the people that always see things, the cup half empty, the pessimist and the optimist. And that has to do a lot, obviously. It's a spiritual thing, but it relates a lot to do with in other words, he's saying it's also biological. The root of it is spiritual, but it's also biological because the spiritual matches the physical. So according to the keli, according to the vessel, so will be the way the power of the mind will latch itself on into the body will be in accordance to the substance. You have two people. Two people hear the same idea. This guy understands it like this. One completely the opposite. Even it's the same idea. One guy walks out with a very loving idea. The other one comes out from the same teacher with a very judgmental idea. It's the same teaching. Right? So is the light of the seichel in accordance to the way. Even physical, even with the eye. We all have a spiritual power of vision, but with that spiritual power of vision in a body, it clothes itself in a physical eye. So that will make a difference in accordance to the way one's eye is, the physical material of the eye. Some people have a good eye, and some people have a bad eye, which is more of a character state, but he says it's related also physically. A good eye means someone who always looks at people and things and is always happy for the people you look at and you see. And people that look at others and they always are envious and they can't stand when others are having good stuff. It bothers them. It eats them up. It's a bad eye and a good eye. It's a very pleasant eye, a kind eye, and a miserly eye. And that, he says, that's a lot of times to do. It's not just a spiritual flaw or blessing or something like that. It has to do a lot also with the actual material of the eye. Blood and water mix in the eye. Obviously, we're talking about real subtleties. That doesn't mean that this guy walks around with a red eye and this guy is it's very subtle. The coals and all of this, because we're dealing with powers that become very enclosed. They grasp by the vessels. So the vessel, the container, which is the physical eye or the physical brain, integrates and assimilates the power, and then together they work, and one has to adapt to the other. That's why the light becomes very much like the substance of the vessels. And if that energy that is the vestee, who is vesting itself, and the vessel, the container, is the creation, that means that the creative energy becomes creation-like. Now, for when something drops from being creative to creation, it's an enormous drop. But now he's going to show you that it's possible that you have sometimes a energy, a power, a force that goes somewhere that is present in a certain place, and yet it's not vested. It's more transcendental. And he gives an example. When you're thinking, your power of thought, and you're thinking about something, so even though you're thinking about that thing, your brain is still not at your mind, your thought is not entering into it. It's just thinking about it. And therefore, your thought is not impacted by the thing that it is thinking about. In the sense to say that the parameters or the features of the thing that it's thinking about are affecting your thought. And what do I mean by that? He gives a very interesting example. If you are thinking that you're in Paris, and you close your eyes and you're now walking the streets of Paris, and you are thinking that you're in Pasadena, okay, but you really are over here in Los Angeles, and you're thinking you're in Pasadena, or you're thinking you're in Paris. You would think that to go to Paris, which would take you a few hours, much longer. Okay, thought you can go much faster, let's say. With thought you can go much faster than with physical. You have to walk there. You can think it. You travel the distance. But you would say to get to Paris should take you quite a long time to get there. At least measure. How far are you from Pasadena? I don't know. We're 10 miles from Pasadena. How far am I from Paris? I'm from Paris, a few thousand miles. So to cover the distance from here to Paris, to travel over there in thought, and to cover the distance over here should take time. Different time. But it's not that way. I can think. That makes no difference to me. I'm thinking that I'm here. I'm thinking I'm in New Zealand, in Australia, and I can think and I could be there with just as fast as I am around the corner. Why? Because my thought is not actually enclosing itself literally in that place. It's not that there's no connection, because imagine if I'm actually visualizing the place itself. I can really visualize, but yet I'm not trapped in it. He doesn't say this, but I was thinking, like, if it's raining and cold in Paris, I'm not going to be cold just because I'm thinking about that in Paris. I mean, of course, you could put yourself, a person's mind could mentally attach themselves so strong to a certain phenomenon, to the point that you forget that you're here. You go into a trance and you literally transport yourself there. And if the wind is blowing, you feel the wind on you and you actually start shivering in cold. That's a very, very powerful ability of a mind to actually go there in the literal sense. But usually if the thought is thinking, right? If every day you have your cousin, your friend, your whatever, your teacher, your whoever it is, your child, your sister lives in Paris, and every day you in your thought, this is like a person that you care about very much. So you go there a little bit and spend time with them in your mind. Oh, today is cold, it's raining, today it's hot, so you're cold, you have to put on a sweater, and now you're hot, you're wearing short sleeves. You're not doing that, because the fact that you're going there in your thought is not, you're not really enclosing itself into it. That's the idea. Which doesn't happen in thought. When a person thinks that he's at a distance of 1,000 parsa, let's see, 1,000 miles of derech in which your mind crossed over. I think he means even if you're thinking that you're driving across, you can do it like 1, 2, 3, you're there. If you would have thought that you're in a closer place, it would have been quicker. It would have been easier. Doesn't make a difference. It's like at the end, if you spent a half an hour thinking you're in Pasadena, or you spent a half an hour thinking you're in Paris, you would think that you'd be jet lagged. No, after you went to Paris, you'd be so tired. After you went to Australia, for sure, you'd be so messed up. But if you went just around the corner, a couple of blocks away, and you thought, oh, this is close, you're not tired. But it's not that way. Even if it's the same half an hour. So when you thought that you're in a city that's 1,000 parsa away, or if it's a place that's only 1 parsa away. You might argue, say, what are you talking about? It's a silly argument. I'm not going, I'm just thinking about it. I'm not connecting to the place at all. He says, no, you are. You're actually thinking the place. The point over here is that the way thought is, that thought doesn't get enclosed and trapped in the place that it's thinking of. You're always free. You're not in it. That's why it can grab the whole place at one shot. It doesn't make a difference between closeness and distance. Because when a certain koach is in a state of tfisa, enclosed and being grasped and enclosed, then it's actually changing in accordance, as we spoke earlier, according to the vessel. Like he explained earlier, how the power of vision becomes impacted by the physical eye. And the brain and the intelligence becomes impacted by the nature the chemistry, so to speak, of the person's brain. But if it's not in a state of islapshus, it doesn't change. And now he's going to give another example for this idea. How, when you're enclothing yourself, one thing is enclosed in the other, the enclother has impact on the enclothee. But if it's not in a state of enclothement, then the enclother has no impact on the enclothee. So what does he say? Another example. This will be understood as follows. We have a more abstract intellectual soul. And then we have a more vivifying, more animating, beastly kind of soul. They both operate inside of us. One is more refined, elevated, and it's more objective. The other one, obviously, is very subjective. The energizing, animating soul is very much about, it's very sensual. That's what it's all about, its own senses. And it looks at everything through the eyes of its own sensual experience, of what it can have from it. But thank God we have a higher soul. We're not even talking about the godly soul that is completely selfless, but a more objective soul that can come into a situation and look at things, not how this makes me feel, but just to see what the truth of something is. And then there's always the more beastly part of the person that, if we're not careful, the mind can kind of get a picture of something, and immediately you're starting to tilt it, as he's explaining, there's bribery happening, because you are going to gain if the situation will be like this. So you're already kind of looking at, this is the right, this is correct, that this is incorrect, or so on and so forth. And what's happening? Your sensual soul is bribing your intellectual soul. That's what he's going to say. Why? Because the intellect is enclosed, the intellectual soul encloses itself in the vivifying soul. So the vivifying animal soul could distort the intellectual, that even intellectually you start seeing things crookedly. And we can sometimes, if we're subtle and we're sensitive, we can see it happening in ourselves sometimes. In a relationship, you're in a situation, whatever, and you have a certain very clear picture, and then suddenly the more lower side of the person starts manipulating that you should, and you can feel it's dragging you away. For bribery is where the person is, the judge is supposed to just look at it. But if you sent him, you gave him a couple of, you give him an envelope with some cash, with $5,000 before, the judge just slipped it in his hand. So he already wants to make you happy. So he's not looking at it anymore. That's the sensual self that is thinking about the money, the personal gain, and it's going to distort. The mind is going to go that way. Even the intellect, which is supposed to be abstract, you're going to see it that way. That's the idea that he's developing over here. So you see over here that a lot. And when one thing is enclosed in something else, the lower the vessel taints the enclosee, the energy that's being enclosed in it. However, he's going to say, very interesting idea, that people that are very, very, very abstract thinkers, they're very deep thinkers, and when they think about any subject, they think about it from a very, very, very pure intellectual place, from a very deep intellectual place. Because he's explaining there's two levels in the intellectual soul. There is a more external level of the intellectual soul, which most people operate from. And that could be objective if you leave it to its own operation. Or it could be subjective and influenced by lower interests, by personal gains. Because it's the external part of the intellectual soul that encloses itself in the lower soul. But he says there are people who are such, they because they're exercise their mind very much, and they open themselves themselves up to very deep thinking, and they pulled out a very deep level, they expose through a lot of hard work a very, very high level of intelligence in their minds. And these people, they're far less bribable because their minds they think from a different place in them. That part of their being that is not enclosed in the more vivifying. They're thinking from a much higher department, from a much more detached place. And over there, even though they personally would love the outcome to be, and they stand to gain so much if it's going to be like this. And I'm not talking about necessarily very moral people. He's not talking over here about morality. He's talking about the nature. In other words, a person like this, you need to give them much more in order to bribe them. Not because they're so super moral, it's just because their level of intelligence and where they're looking at it is from a very, very abstract place where the animal lower self is not touching it. So even though they would like it to be this way and like it to be that way, they'll still give you a very clear, not because they're such good people, just because the place where you're communicating and where they're speaking to you from is from that very high place. Obviously, it's rare to find people like that, but there are people like that. Now, righteous, moral people that overcome everything and push all things aside and give you, that is possible even on a lower level. But this kind of a thing, he says, it's like people that are very. So what is all this coming to say? All this is coming to prove the idea that when an energy is enclosed in something else, the vessel impacts the energy. Okay. But here he's bringing an example, not from physicality, the physical containers of the body, but from two levels in the soul itself. So it's a more refined example for this idea. As it is the nefesh sichli v'nefesh achiyoni, the two souls that we have. Hativi, achiyoni hativi, the natural, vivifying soul. And beis nefashis, there are two souls. The nefesh sichli ikrei seichel. The intellectual soul is primarily intellect. And its main nest, its main lodging is in the brain. The nefesh achiyoni, and then we have a more animalistic, vivifying soul, ativi, the natural soul. Ikar mohusa, its main substance of being. Midos, it's mainly an emotional entity. In other words, emotions are what excites me, what's good for me. That's the core of emotions, is a little bit ego, right? It's about self. And its primary place is in the heart. Then base partsufim, these are two configurations. Partsuf aseichel, there's like two eyes, a higher eye, the configuration of the intellect, the parts of amidas, and the intellectual and the emotional self. And one is enclosed in the other. Like every higher power, higher powers are enclosed in lower powers. And this enclosement of the higher in the lower, is still the chest. What does that mean? That the lower power is enclosing the higher power. Let's look at it this way. It's almost like two humans. The lower human is enclosing the higher human, but it's only enclosing the higher human until the chest. That's a Kabbalistic idea, which obviously explains also, that's the way it is in the divine, that it also explains many psychological phenomena in us as well. Higher, but till the chest. That means the chest is the third of the person. So the lower 2/3 are actually, it means the lower third is enclosed. The upper, even though physically, if you till the chest, you got most of the person. But spiritually, the more higher powers of the person are up here. I think that's what it means over here. So the higher power allows itself to be enclosed in the lower power only in its lowest third. So Kabbalistically, that means there is Chabad, the Chachma Bin Adas, the intellectual powers. Then there is Chesed, Gevura, Teferes. So the way it works is Chabad, Chesed, Gevura, Teferes. So it says like this: the lower human, the lower being, its entire being, its Mochin, Mayach, Chachma, Bin, is enclothing a higher being, but he's enclothing the feet, which is Netzach and Hod, which are the two thighs, or the 2 feet, legs of the mashpia, of the influencer, of the higher power, and the Yesod element of it, Netzach Hod Yesod, and the Malchus. And in Teferes, which is already higher, the lower third of Teferes. But the upper 2/3 of Teferes, and Chesed, and Gevura, and Chachma Bina Das are not enclosed. So if we take that in the intellect, the Netzach Hod Yesod and the lower third of Teferes of the intelligence is enclosed in the lower vivifying soul. So peoples whose intelligence is primarily from their lower element of their intelligence, these people are very bribable by self-interest. But peoples whose intelligence is very, very in the upper element of their intelligent soul are far less likely to be bribed. That's what he's explaining over here. Okay? Until the chest, in the Teferes, the last third of Teferes, the Netzach Hod Yesod and the Netzach Hod Yesod, and because it is enclosed, the upper is enclosed in the lower, the lower element has the power to bend and tilt the upper power, to whatever it wants. It can even force it to go against its truth. You see, that's the idea of bribery. It blinds the eyes of the wise. If I would be looking at this the way from a clear-minded, uninfluenced side, elements that are no self-interest, just the truth, this guy would have convicted. He's a judge. He would have convicted. The one on trial, the person standing in trial slipped him, an envelope of $5,000-$10,000. So suddenly, he didn't tell him anything. He just gave him. Suddenly, he's thinking a little bit different. Once he takes the money, his heart is already bending to see it, and then intellectually he sees it incorrectly. L'chayev as a seichel is bending the seichel l'chayev, the idea which was supposed to convict l'schus for merit, and he comes up with all kinds of twisted explanations. But then he doesn't even see it twisted. He sees it as the truth. We see that when a person desires very, very much to be one way, you sometimes, even smart people, sound utterly stupid, literally utter ridiculous, because they're so bought into something and their heart wants so much it should be some way, even when you can see with such clarity that this is such nonsense, you don't see it this way. You come up with all kinds of maybe. To see it only the way you want to see it. Especially when it's something that it matters to your heart very deep. It's like, you can't see bad on your own children. Even though a child is wrong, a parent doesn't, you'll always excuse it, you're fine. And you come up with all kinds of like crazy ideas. All because the heart, it's not objective, it's subjective. Until you can't see it any other way, you're blinded. You don't even understand how can it be different. Well, and the truth of the matter is it's not true at all. That's why we also know that when it comes to matters when we have to make true decisions in life, Can't trust ourselves. We have to always have someone objective to ask, because we can fool ourselves based on what we want it to be. You have two people. What's the problem when two people are arguing? Why do they have to go to a judge? Because both of them have self-interest. Most people that are coming to court, each one is going to have arguments that they are 100%, and they have the best arguments, but the arguments that are favoring them. That's what's going to. They're not coming to say the arguments favoring the other. Each one is showing how the truth of this story is like this. And the judge, who has no game either way. He's a completely objective side. He can see it straight. He can see the truth. The litigants, each one sees it only the way they want. But all of this is only on the lower level of intellect that is enclosed in the heart. But the essence of the intelligence, that means the essence of the intellectual soul, that's referring to a very high level and broadness of the mind, which is higher than the intellect that has a relationship to emotions. It's not impressed at all what the heart desires. That's what I mentioned earlier, people that are on a very high level of intellect. The chazak, people that are very strong in their mind, they have very expansive minds, and they're very strong, their intellect is very strong. They see things based on what is true. Even if the heart would like to see it in another way. If people like that who sometimes come and they invested their entire lives in something, and yet they themselves refute it because they feel that it's not the truth. And it's a life work, and they built and they got their acclaimed scientists, and they'll go and they'll flush it all down because they're just interested in the truth, and that and they feel this is not the truth, and they can therefore refute their whole entire building that they built, because to them it's not what I want, it is. Because these are people whose innovation, their mind is from the essence of their mind, of their power, of their wisdom, not from the part that is vested in the heart. And when something is not vested, it's not controlled by it. You're controlled by something when you're enclosed in it. But when you're not enclosed in it, it has no power over you. And not because of the desire and the yearning of the heart. Because he's such a great intellect, all of his brain, all of his understandings, and from the essence of his intelligence. The heart does not bend it, because it's separated from what the heart feels. And just like we all understand that if you're trying, if I come to you to figure something out, and I would like you to see it this way, and you are seeing it that way. Everybody understands that if I go over to you, if I slip you money, and that's already speaking to your heart, I'm going to tilt your heart, then it might tilt your heart. How about if I'm going to take your hand and I'm just going to pick up your hand, I'm going to move it to here, this way. And because the physical movement of the hand, the process of the mind, of where the process is taking place, we are figuring it out, where that whole experience is taking place, is not in the realm of the physical space. If I'm standing here or standing there, it's existing in a whole different area. So by moving this way or that way is not going to change it. Just like the movement of a hand, because this intellect is completely removed from the chush, from the from the element of touching, of. So for people who are on a high level, it's the intellect is removed from the heart as well, from the heart's desire. Doesn't impact it at all. And therefore, the pu'ula of the seichel on chayfetz alev is not negei im shapoil bayachna shalayas bechayfetz liba shloya negei klal alev. In other words, now, how will the mind then influence the heart? He says it's not really, it's irrelevant. In other words, either the mind will override the heart. Say, okay, you want it this way, but it doesn't make a difference. You want, but this is the way it is. Or it remains completely unrelated to the heart. The heart doesn't even is busy with its own things. It's not. They remain two worlds apart. Either it's going to dominate over the heart, or it's just not. It's irrelevant. This is the idea of what we call certain beings. They're called sichlim nivdalim, pure intellectual angels. Okay. These two lines I had a problem understanding. But Dugnim is that Yuvim Belukus. So now he's going to give an example of in the divine, same idea that you can have certain. He brought earlier. He was bringing the concept that when something is enclosed in something, the vessel is influencing it. And in the divine, it's also that way. The very energy that ultimately comes down to enclose itself in the world is impacted by the world in the sense that it picks up some of the finite properties of this world. And because of that, it's so diminished from what it was before. But now he's going to give an example of energies that are present in the low, but remain detached and remained above. So in the godly, we find that as well. For example, sometimes there is a situation where there are revelations of the world of Atzilus, of the world of emanation in this world, and the Atzilus energies are not impacted at all by the coarseness of the world. They remain in the purity of Atzilus. A very big tzaddikim. They're such holy souls, and they're not impacted by the coarseness of this world, even though they're present here, because they never become enclosed. I'm going to give an example of Yosef. Yosef was such a super tzaddik. He had such a deep cleaving and connection to God. He was managing, and he was one of the people that was the most present. He was managing the affairs of the entire economy of Egypt. He ran the entire country. At the same time, he was the biggest tzaddik, and his mind was in a state of complete attachment to God. How was he able to do the two things? Or how is it that and we know Egypt was such a lowly place. He was able to be there and not be there at the same time. He was completely aloof, even though he was there. Like we said earlier, that you can be in Paris and not be cold or hot just because it's hot. In your thought, you can be there. Yosef physically being in Egypt was like we in our thought being there. So it's not impacted. So he didn't impact it. It's one of the examples he gives. There is a Gili, a revelation of Atzilus in the three lower worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. Ad Gam Lamati, even below Shemeir Oira Atzilus Kamoishahu, that the lights of Atzilus could shine as they are. Ukamoi b'matan Torah. In the time of the giving of the Torah, there was godly revelation in this world. Down here, there was a revelation of the Or Ein Sof of Atzilus. But it wasn't enclosed. It wasn't grabbed. It didn't change the light. The light as it is, the light did not become coarsened by being in this world. The light of Torah. When we're learning Torah, the Torah remains holy, even though it's being revealed sometimes in coarse vessels. The Torah. That's why it says that when a person is allowed to learn Torah, Torah is God. Generally, we know when we are tamei, when we are ritually impure, you're not allowed to touch something that is holy. You're not allowed to touch truma, holy, because then you're contaminating. How can someone study Torah when they're ritually impure? So the Talmud says Torah is like fire. Just like you can't contaminate fire, you can't contaminate it. What's the idea of fire? Fire is transcendent. Even when it's down, it's really up. Doesn't. So Torah is that way. Even when it's here, it's holy, but it's not, and therefore you can't contaminate it. Torah is the light of Atzilus. As it is above, that's how it is below. It doesn't change. It doesn't get coarsened, even though it's talking about lower subjects. For example, a soul is different. The soul comes down in a body and it becomes very impacted by our physicality. It scars the soul. It impacts the soul. The soul needs a lot of therapy afterwards to get rid of stuff that it shouldn't have caught up. But the Torah comes down, and put it this way, the Torah a lot of times deals with the most horrific things, the darkest evil that people are capable of. The Torah talks about all kinds of stuff. And it has to tell you, if someone did so and so, what should be the law? And the Torah is going into all that stuff. Sometimes very, very seemingly even vulgar things. And yet it's all Torah. It's all hard. Because it remains aloof. That's the idea. And that's one of the reasons why Torah is not dependent. Oh, I'll give you an example. We're learning now in Rambam. The Rambam study that we do, daily study in Rambam, is dealing now with the laws of dead corpse. I'm a Kohen. As a Kohen, I'm not allowed to go I'm not going to a cemetery. I'm not allowed to go and come into contact with any dead corpse. In the last few days, I'm learning all day about dead corpses and cemeteries and burial sites and a house with a dead corpse. And I'm so much of my mind is being invested in these explorations. So I'm walking in now. Maimonides, I'm learning Rambam, so Maimonides is taking me into a room where there's a dead body and the body is halfway sticking out the window and this and that. I'm busy with the dead body all day. So my son asked me, what are you learning? I'm learning about the corpse. Just funny. But it's like intricate study. Tumma did. Now, but I'm a Kohen. How can I do that? The answer is, even though when I'm learning Torah, you're supposed to like really be there, you're not there because you're there, but you're above it. You're not enclosed in it. That's the idea. And that's also the reason why the sages say that when you're learning a subject of Torah, it's considered as if you've done the mitzvah. So if you're learning, it seems to be opposite of what I was just saying. If you're learning about a cemetery, it's as if you've done the cemetery. No, because then you become tummy. But on the other hand, there is a certain quality. Today's days, we don't have any temple yet, and we can't offer sacrifices. But the sages say there is a way you can offer all. What happens if someone needs a sacrifice? Oh, tough. We can't. Bring Mashiach. We'll be able to bring the sacrifice. But until then, you can't. However, there is a way to do it. If you study the laws of the sacrifices, it's as if you've offered the sacrifice. But hold it. If you are here and standing in Los Angeles and you're offering a sacrifice, or wherever you are, in New York, or in London, and you're offering a sacrifice, that is one of the most serious sins. You're not allowed to offer a sacrifice outside of the temple. So how is it that when you learn Torah, it's considered as if you offer the sacrifice, and sacrifices need to be in the temple, and you're not in the temple? So then you're going to say, well, you're not offering the sacrifice. You're not so why is it considered an atonement? You are, but if you are, then you're doing a sin. And also, the only one who can offer the sacrifice is a Kohen. What happens if you're not a Kohen and you're learning? The answer is the Torah is higher than time and space. So in the mitzvah, which is the mitzvah, the actual performance of a mitzvah, is to be done in the arena of time and space. Torah, even though it's talking about the world of time and space, it itself remains aloof and above time and space. That's why it doesn't become contaminated, and that's why all these things that we thought, and that's the reason why you can fulfill the commandment in the realm that's beyond time and space, because over here the time and the space of it is not does not limit. Let's see. Everybody that studies the Torah of Ola says if he offered an oila, gam she'ein is man akrav, even if it's not the time of offering, it's at night time, let's say. It's not the place where you can offer. Because you're now the lights of Atzilus, but it's above, it's not impacted by the place. Moshe also, he came down in this world and he remained Atzilus, and he wasn't impacted by anything in this world. The Moshe we know that Hashem, that it says that every time God repeats someone's name twice in the Torah, like Yaakov, Avram, there is a line, there is in the Torah, you won't see it in the Torah, but in the Chumash you'll see it. There is a line between the first time his name is mentioned and the second time his name is mentioned. By Moshe, the only time there is no interruption between them. There's no mechitza. The Zohar says, or everyone else, pasik tame, but not. And the reason is, so Chassidus, the Zohar points this out. And Chassidus explains why is that. They say like this. Whenever someone's name is mentioned twice, is because we exist on multiple levels. So Avram Avinu, for instance, there is his neshama as it is in Atzilus, and then there is Avram Avinu when his neshama came down here. His soul from Atzilus and his soul down here changed. When the soul descended, it's not the same. It's a reflection of the soul up there, but it's a far cry from the soul up there. So every Yaakov, so is every tzaddik. When they descend, they're impacted by the change, and it's diminished. As we spoke earlier, becoming clothed at every level, it changes. Moshe didn't change. He remained exactly as he was there. That's why there's no interruption. The same Moshe up in Atzilus is down here. His soul didn't take on any of the changes. That's why he's the one who brings us the Torah that also comes down without it being impacted by the environment of where it comes into. The Kamosha Lamala came to Lamata. So you have Atzilus down here. That's why Yosef, going back to remember I said earlier, that's why he wasn't bothered at all. Just like we said earlier, that the emotions can't bother someone who's very high. Same also, Yosef was not bothered by all the darkness of Egypt. That he was involved, and it wasn't that he wasn't occupied. He was, but still, he was in it. He was overseeing it, but yet it didn't trap him. He was a markava to God. He was a chariot to God. He wasn't grasped in the world. Because he wasn't grasped in the world, it didn't bother him. Another example, the wisdom of Solomon. He had divine wisdom. It was the lower level of Chachma of Malchus of Atzilus, was downloaded into Shlomo's head. God gave him wisdom. He had the wisdom of the world of Atzilus. Mamish, lamata down below. And it did not become soiled and coarsened in this world because it was never enclosed and pulled in. So that's true. There is a possibility for something like that. But the power of God in creation and on its lowest level, that Hashem does insert, there is a power of God that does enclose itself in the world. And because that does enclose itself in the world, it does change in the world. And that brings him back to the point that he started very at the beginning of today's whole class, That just like the soul, when it comes down, is severely changed. Most souls, not Yosef and Moshe. We are severely diminished when we come down and change, and we don't have the same experiences like we had in the past. So to the divine energy in this world is very dramatically changed. And all of this is leading up to the point. So what's the point? If creation is just a descent of everything and a diminishment of everything, so why did God create? And the answer is for the next point. So what we will do. The divine power that becomes enclosed in the worlds and in creations. This becomes like the value of the creations. That the energy that's literally in the creations, it too is in a state of a creation. It is energy. How can it be like a creation? It's similar to the muhus of the creations. The Yeshloimar, we can say, and I'm going to conclude with this because we're going to finish. I'm going to give one more class on this mimer. We're going to get to the next part. Now that we find out how low things has become, how high can we make everything by us submitting and surrendering the somethingness of our existence to God, which is really awesome. The second half of the mimer, to me, is so much more energetic, and there's a lot of intellectual discussion till now, but we'll wait for the next class. The Yeshloim, now this is the last and final summary of what we just learned. The Gimel and Yanim Elu and Gimel B'chinas, the three levels, which are, remember we said, the pitcher in the bullpen, the pitcher as he's actually standing on the pitching mount, ready to pitch, and the force that he emits, that he's sending out in the pitch itself. These three levels are referred to, and as it refers to God, as Gam B'chinas Or, Chayas, V'Koyach, light, energy, and power. Haniska B'Sifra Shabbeininim, as mentioned in Tanya. The Yedua Shen Gimel Madregas, these are three levels. The light remains in its pure, complete transcendence, and therefore it's fully infinite. It's not impacted at all from, we see that in light physically, that when light, sunlight, does the sunlight change if it's shining on a beautiful golf course or if it's shining on a horrific smelly dump? The light is the same. It's not adapting. It's the same light. Of course, here it's going to stink, but that's nothing to do with the light. The light is light, and it doesn't make a difference to the light where it is, because it's not that. It's just light. So the level of light, when we refer to the divine level of light, remains. I mean, even if it's down here, it's aloof. It's above it all. The ikar ub'chinas oir soiviv, and that's generally referred to the light of the soviv kalam, the encompassing light. The yedua, it is not, and this that we said that in Atzilus, it's not, there's no number, it's not yet adapted, is because Atzilus is, the lights of Atzilus are considered soviv kalam into our world. The yedua, the gam Atzilus ub'chinas soiviv is considered soviv, the gabe biyach compared to Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. So the general light of Atzilus is not in a state of islapshus, its tfisa doesn't change, as we said earlier. That's oir. Chayos, energy. Energy is lower than light. Energy is already meant to enliven. Light is meant to express the emanator. It's not about you. It's not, I'm giving you life. I'm just shining. So it's more about revelation of the bestower. Energy is more a direct, I'm considering you, so I'm already adapting to you. That's called chayos. And then the koyach chayos and koach is what already comes in an internalized way. The chayos comes in the chayos energy, the higher level of the indwelling light is in the aspect of numbers. The koyach and koach is in a complete level of enclosement, which is similar to the actual creation. And here's where he summarized. Moving, it's understood. That the radiance of the divine that becomes a source to the world is in a tremendous descent, Legaba kamoshi batzilus, and compared to the way it is in Atzilus. Now, he says, just like it is from Atzilus to Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, which is this drop from Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, the world of emanation, to the three lower worlds, that it's different in Atzilus and it's incomparably higher to its very emanation, where it's already contracting itself to become a source to the three lower worlds, and even more so for the energy that is actually vested in the three lower worlds. In the same way, it's also from the Or Ein Sof, which is higher to Atzilus, into Atzilus, because Atzilus is considered like a world compared to the Or Ein Sof. So we have the same phenomenon, but of course on a much higher level. To Atzilus. The oidus to Atzilus, because the lights of Atzilus harei hem klulim ba'oidin seif hamatzah. The lights of Atzilus, before they came out into Atzilus, before the 10 attributes, before these lights emanated in Atzilus, they were first included in the infinite light of the emanator. But when it goes out into Atzilus, they're already in a state of descent. And where do we know that Atzilus, the fact that when they come into Atzilus, it's considered already a descent? Because when the concept of Atzilus, we find when Moshe, God says to Moshe, Moshe complains, I can't handle the Jewish people. It's too much for me. So God says to Moshe, gather 70 elders, and I will emanate from your light onto them. So the words it uses over there, it will descend upon them. So you see that the energy, their energy was first inside Moshe, but for it to go from Moshe to them is considered a descent. We know that the way Moshe light emanated onto them is similar to the Atzilus above. Because if it says v'yaradati, I will descend, v'atzalti, and I will emanate, maruach she'alecha. So he's learning. It doesn't mean only that God will descend to emanate, but that the emanations itself is considered a descent. Maruach she'alecha, that's from the spirit that's on you. You see, it's a descent. And then I will put it upon them. In other words, as the lights are in Moshe, it's too powerful for the 70 elders. They couldn't receive it on that level. It first needed to be downgraded, and then it can go on to the 70s of Canaan. That's another descent. And the same is the same also applies to the light of Atzilus from the Or Ein Sof HaMatzah, from God himself. First of all, it's a descent on the light. Even before it goes into the vessels, the very fact that it emanates into Atzilus, even without the vessels, it's already a descent. And then when it encloses in the vessels, just like he said earlier, the fact that it's just adjusting to the three lower worlds is already a descent. And then when it encloses itself, it's even more of a descent. So you see two stages of descent. Same as from Atzilus, from above Atzilus to Atzilus. The Yedua is known, there's three levels. One is the lights when they are still included in the infinite one, the emanator. On this it says in Pasach Alayo, Antu Chad, you are completely one. There is no number at all. There's only one singular being. Even though the lights are there, all the potential lights, but they're all still just in simple oneness. Mebais, and the second level, as these spherot, potential spheros, reveal themselves from the Or Ein Sof, before they went into the containers. This is what's referred to in Sefer Yetzirah, Eser Spheros Belima. So we can't say anymore it's one without a number, because you're counting already a number. But what does it say? It says the 10 spheros belima, without any substance, because they didn't go, there's nothing really to define them as 10, even though we're referring to them as 10, because they haven't gone into the containers yet to define them. Okay, that of course needs a lot of this explanation of how are they 10 if they don't have a mahus yet, but okay. Now, Gimel, and the third level, once they're enclosed in the containers of Atzilus, then they become worked upon by the vessels. The light of Chachma, and the light of Chesed, like stated elsewhere. And now he's going even higher. The general light of the thread, and we learned this many times. First, there was infinite light. Then God created space for the worlds by making a big black hole. And into that black hole, he shined a little thread. So he's explaining that this is way above Atzilus. So this light of the thread is called Oirakav. When it was still in the source before it ever emanated into the black hole, it was so much higher than when it's emanating out. That's the same idea. He's all proving that this whole system of creation from the very beginning is just a powerful descent. And the purpose can't be the descent. Which comes from the Malchut of the Ein Sof. Malchut of the Ein Sof is, we're dealing with before the Tzimtzum, it's just Ein Sof. But in that, we're referring to the power for the Ein Sof to imagine a world and to create a world. There's no creation anywhere close to it. There's no black hole yet in the space for it. But the element of it to the desire of it, let's put it, to want to be a king over a creation, even though there's no possibility for creation yet, is already called the Malchut element of it. So from the Malchus of the Ein Sof comes this Kaf. This is already a descent, the way it was before it ever left. Because actually, before the worlds were created, the Medrash says before the world was created, he and his name were one. It's a weird Medrash. What do you mean he and his name are one? If there's no world, what's his name? What's a name? A name is only to be related to others. Dahainu, so he explains. The light that has a connection or a possibility as a relationship to the worlds that later was going to be in the world, that's called his name. And that potential, the fact that God always could have, if he wanted, to create a world and therefore have a name. So that light, before it was ever, so then it was just him. But we're calling it his name because his name was completely embedded in him. Before the worlds were created. We're referring to his ability to illuminate the worlds, to create the worlds, and to before the contraction, when it was still completely one with its source, in a complete non-detectable even state. It wasn't even called light. Like the light of the sun, which is still in the sun's orbit itself, not even the orbit, in the sun's globe, you don't even call it light. It's not called light in an array. So is the light when it's still absorbed in its source. It's not called lights. But once it already comes down in the light of this thread, then it's already light. And that's why the kav is called, even the kav, even this thread is called something from nothing. This thread energy is the energy of everything, of all the partzufim, everything, but still it's called something. Because compared to the way it was when it was still submerged in the Or Ein Sof, then it was nothing. Like it says in the once we're talking kav, there is already 10 spherois, the shorshe oiros, the roots of the lights. Because the root of these lights, as they are still in the Or Ein Sof, which are called the 10 hidden spherois, over there it's not even a sphera. It's in a state of absolute unity and simplicity. Is literally Ein Sof. But even the roots of the 10 spheres themselves are considered one with him on that level. But once it's in the kav, it's already 10. Because Because he says this, that we say that in Sefer Yetzirah that there's 10 spheres, but they don't have any substance. In general, that relates already to the light of the Kav. And then when the Kav further, this line, this thread, projects outwards into the actual world, that's already detailed, specific flows. That's like vessels. And that's already a third level. He's just pointing that these three levels exist higher and higher and higher. Comes out, this is a very big descent. Now he's explaining that the higher you go, the descent from one level to the next is considered much bigger. Because each level is, the change is vast. The lower you go, because everything is more miniature, the difference, even though we made such a big deal before, how number and beyond number is such an incomparably lower, it's in a small scale compared to these ginormous drops that happen on the highest, these much primordial stages. The Madregas al Yonis, in the earlier stages, the descent is considered much lower from the lower level, even though the energy after the descent is still so sublime. But compared to what it was, it's considered a greater descent. Even though on the highest levels, even when they are in a descended state, they're still very high. But yet their comparison to when they were included in their source is in a completely different level. And that's why we say that the more than the valuelessness of Asiya to Atzilus, the more than the nothingness of the world of matter compared to the world of Atzilus, we say this is nothing compared to that. Atzilus is even more nothing compared to the Or Ein Sof. And Rechatzilus Lagabe Ein Sof. So the descent is even greater. Omnam is going to explain the biggest descent of them all. As great as all these descents are, the most dramatic descent is the descent of the soul. Because the soul is higher than all these lights. Because after everything, even if you trace the lights back, higher and higher and higher, it's still emanations of creation of the world. Creation as it is still in the primordial stages, but it's still creation. And creation, souls are above creation. They're deeper than creation. And therefore, to take a soul from a place so high and send it down is the biggest drama, the biggest diminishment, even bigger than all these changes. That's what he's adding over here. And all of this is going to lead us to the place that we need a very powerful justification for this. A few more lines. And then I was thinking I'm going to stop over here, and I didn't realize that he's going to go. I want to finish at the point where we can learn what the justification is in the next class. But the descent of the soul is a greater descent than all the levels. The order from all the other divine emanations. Because the divine revelations and emanations are all what have a connection to the worlds. That's why it emanated to create the worlds. And Shemos b'chol makom, on every level, whatever level you will go to, and you will look at the world and the soul is always a notch higher than the world of every level. Because then the souls come, because the main point over here is worlds, creation, worlds are from the ray, souls are from the essence. So from every level, soul is from the essence of that level. And the worlds are from the emanations of the level, radiance of the level. And a ray compared to the essence is zero. So vanashamas b'chol makom ema atzmos, from the essence, shalamayla ma'or, above the light. Hashayach al-olam, that has a relationship to the world. The Ba'atzilus, because for instance, in the world of Atzilus, the root of the soul is from the essential lights of Atzilus. And the roots of the world is from the external light of Atzilus. Like we know the difference between souls and angels. The Malachim Sharsham Mebchinas Adibur, the angels, their source is from speech, which speech is external. You talk to people outside of you. And souls come from thought. Thought is internal. So the heavens and all the heavenly beings are all created with the word of God, and the spirit, and with the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. And souls rose in God's thought. What does it mean they rose in his thought? Who means not just that they're in thought, but in thought itself, they're in a very high level. See, the worlds are from speech, but you can't speak without thinking. So there has to be a thought before that speech. But that thought is an external thought, a thought that's related to speech. Souls come from an inner thought. There is a level of thought in worlds as well. And thoughts come, and the souls come from the inner point of thought. And he's asking another question. And even though angels are mebchinas yichud abba ve'imo, we know that what's the mother, the parenting power, the power that creates the angels is through also a zivug, a unification of attributes, which gives birth to the angels. And it's very high. It's father and mother, chachma and bina, and the source for the neshamis. What gives birth to neshamis are a lower level of zivug, of unification between Ze'er, Anpin, and Malchus. And Zah and Malchus are the emotional attributes, and they're much lower than the intellectual attributes. So the angels come from the union between the male and female and intellectual level, Chachma and Bina. And the souls come from the unification of Zah and Malchus, which is emotional level, male and female element of it. It's much lower. So he's explaining, notwithstanding this coming from higher, but they're a product of a far more external type of a unification, which is called a intimacy of a kiss. It's a breath to breath. And the souls come from what's referred to, compared to breath as a physical intimacy, which the idea behind it is that from your essence you can only give over in a physical intimacy, like you see parents create a child. All other love and transmissions is considered external. So even though this is coming from a higher level, it's the external outer breath of it as opposed to the inner essence of it. So the souls carry within themselves the very inner essence of the divine. The malachim yichud abba ve'imah v'neshamas miyichud zun. In a yichud abba ve'imah zivug neshikin is a zivug of a kiss, which is only a ray. The yichud zun and the yichud of zochar v'nukva, which is on a lower level, and yichud gufni is considered a physical union, even though when there's no physicality over here. But the point over here is it's considered an essential union. It's a much deeper inner transmission. Right? And the neshamas and mebchinas atmius atzilus. So neshamas are from the essence of atzilus. And if that's an atzilus, and if you go even source to source, the soul is pure, from the supernal purity, which is higher than the thought from where creation comes from. On the most primordial level of creation begins with the thought where God says, I want to be a king. That's the first thought of existence. In the infinite light, a thought that I wanted. That thought is so unified with the infinite, fine. But then it says, who prompted him to have that thought? Who coached him into the thought or coaxed him into the thought? It says he deliberated with the souls. That means that the souls are higher than that thought. And they decided the thought. So the souls are much deeper than that. But yet, where's our soul? Our soul is in a body. So the descent of the soul is so powerful, so great. And all the descents, Hein b'neshama, whether it's in the soul. Hein ba'oida leki, whether it's in the divine light, the creative energy of God. Hakoilu b'shvil aliyah. It's all for the sake of an elevation. And that elevation is in mine and your hands every day. If we live selfishly and we keep on pulling into existence, into beingness, then we're just following the system that God created from non-beingness into beingness. And then we're just justifying descent. We're pulling things further away from God. At this last and final point, where the lowest, the most potent, powerful, godly being finds itself in the lowest point, it has the ability to turn everything around and lift everything back up into its source. And when things go back up, they lodge themselves deeper from where they went out from. That's the elevation. The worlds go much deeper in from where their source is from. But the only ones who can turn it around is the souls. And how is that? By us bending our egos to God's will, because that gives him pleasure. That's the entertainment. That's the Leviathan. That's the Levi. That's the whole process. And that's what we're going to continue B'ez Hashem in the next class. The Tachlis HaKavana, because the whole intention of is She'ebitul Hayesh, that there should be a something, She'ayesh Batul, there is an I with a me, with a want, and that's somebody who feels himself. And the soul is part of this, because the soul goes into the body and becomes an entity. What's the proof? The proof is that we today, we are souls, and yet, we're more concerned with our needs. We're not all day naturally thinking about what God wants. It's a battle. That's the point. When the person bends ourselves back to be unified in the Ein Sof by doing His will, and that's the whole point of the soul coming down. The lo yarda b'shel atzma. She didn't come down to gain anything for herself. She came down to lift up the broken, disconnected elements. God disconnected and sent down, including our animal soul that's full of the ego, and to give a ride, like a piggyback ride, not a piggy, but it's a soul. But it's supposed to take the animal soul on it and bring it to God by clashing with the ego, teaching the ego a little bit about truth, and getting it to become surrender to Hashem's will. The soul itself was perfect. It doesn't need to be fixed. The yarda, she only went down the vader to purify the sakiness and nefesh bahamis, to fix the animal soul. And not only the animal soul, that's ourselves, but also to fix all the material things that she comes into contact with. And to purify all the material things. In order, the soul's main objective is to affect the animal dark side of the person. It should drop its passions and its pursuits, and it should want a relationship with God. And that's her entire work down here below. First, it has to weaken, because the animal soul is kicking and screaming and screaming all day. All it wants is it's calling for pleasure. It's calling for attention. It's calling for its own agenda. And the soul has to break that. First, it's a ferocious battle. To cause it first to become weakened, until it can take it out and rip it out of its self-centeredness, and its coarseness, that it should desire to be connected to Hashem. And that's what we say in davening. You should love God with both your hearts, your Yetzer Hara as well, with both your inclinations. Also the evil inclination. Hashem should be devoted to loving God. Then it becomes a partner to the godly soul. It joins, it becomes assimilated in the godly soul, and it's lifted up into the godliness of the godly soul. It's not only the soul that it wants to, the animalistic soul, or an animal consciousness that it wants to lift, but it wants to take the energy, it's supposed to take the energy out from all the material things and convert it into godliness. How do you convert physicality? God created us that while we're in a physical body, we are major consumers of material physical things. We can't live unless we consume. And what's the purpose of it? When we are motivated by our soul is the consumer of the Cheerios that we eat, or whatever it is that we eat. The soul is the consumer of the tomato, avocado, and whatever else you're eating, the guacamole that you're eating. because you're eating it to serve God, and then the energy of that food then becomes elevated. And in the power of that eating, you learn Torah and you pray. And the Torah and the learning and the davening is the way you're supposed to, with deep concentration. And the learning of Torah is not to pamper your own ego, but you learn Torah to serve Hashem, to know God. So the material, physical things become included and absorbed in the holiness of the prayer, and the holiness of the Torah. And this is the primary elevation. On this it says, this Liviyasan you created, to be entertained by it. Let's leave this. What does this mean for Ezrat Hashem? Another night this week, I shall complete this. That's the plan. Wow, what a mimer. The Rebbe Rashav's Memorim, very complex, very deep, very everything. He rips everything open and really analyzes it. Really, Baruch Hashem. Okay, everyone have a great week.